She was 19 and rootless. No home. No bank card. No family name that anyone would answer to. Just a cloth coin purse and 3 worn dollars she had kept folded inside her shoe since the night the porch light went dark behind her. And with that $3, she bought a leaning indigo dyer shed beside a blackwater marsh near Dale, Beaufort County, South Carolina, where the last road name had fallen off county maps in 1938. The front sill had rotted until the doorway sagged. The roof leaked through rusted tin in 5 cold seams. The county had condemned it since 1989 and was scheduled for demolition the following spring. But what nobody knew was that beneath the false floorboards under the giant cypress indigo dyeing vat, in a sealed compartment that had not been opened in over 70 years, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Maya Elise Rivers had been losing her whole life without knowing it. She had learned the practice first as a child, before she had language for it, before she understood that loss could become a weather inside a person and not only an event marked by flowers, casseroles, and lowered voices. She lost buttons from school blouses, lost hair ribbons to the wet clay ditch behind the duplex, lost library cards and permission slips, and once, in 2nd grade, a whole brown paper lunch she had carried carefully against her stomach as if it were warm bread. Nobody scolded her much then. The adults around her were too tired for scolding. They made a kind of weary peace with whatever vanished. Her childhood rooms changed every few years, though never by much. A narrow bedroom behind a beauty supply store in Orangeburg. A low apartment in Walterboro, where the window unit rattled all summer and blew out more dust than cold air. 3 rooms in a cinder block house outside Yemassee, where the pine trees grew so close to the walls that needles gathered in the window tracks and ants walked in patient black lines along the sink. The furniture was always borrowed or left behind by someone else. Chairs with one tender leg. Mattresses that kept the shape of earlier bodies. A kitchen table with cigarette burns in the varnish, though nobody in the house admitted to making them. Maya was a watchful child. She could sit without moving for an hour, her knees drawn up beneath her, listening to grown people measure what they would not say. She knew the sound of a bill being slid under a salt shaker. She knew when her mother's voice had gone too bright for the room. She knew which neighbors knocked with kindness and which knocked because they had come to take back what was owed. By 10 she had begun keeping coins in odd places behind baseboards, inside the lining of a winter coat, beneath the paper in a shoebox. The coins were never enough for anything important. Still, she kept them. Her mother, Lorna Rivers, had been the center of Maya's first life in the way a dim lamp is the center of a dark room. Not bright enough to drive back the darkness, but present, trembling, necessary. Lorna had narrow wrists, a soft-speaking voice, and the habit of folding towels into hard, exact squares when she was worried. She worked wherever work accepted her, motel laundries, nursing home kitchens, the back room of a grocery where she wrapped bruised produce in plastic and marked it down with red stickers. She came home smelling of bleach, onions, fryer grease, and the faint powder of disposable gloves. There had been no father in the house, only the fact of one. His name appeared on Maya's birth certificate in ink that had blurred slightly with time, and he existed in Lorna's stories as a gentleman with long fingers who had liked hymns, castanets, and fixing broken radios. He had died before Maya turned 2, in a work accident near a bridge project outside Charleston, and his absence became another piece of household furniture. It took up room. It gathered dust. Nobody moved it. Lorna loved her daughter in gestures that were often smaller than hunger. She would place the bigger piece of fish on Maya's plate without remark. She would mend the underarm seam of a church dress after midnight, her head bent beneath the yellow bulb, sewing as if the needle were making a road she might someday walk. But love, if it is afraid long enough, can grow thin. It can begin to look for shelter instead of truth. By the time Maya was 14, Lorna had begun listening too closely to relatives who spoke with confidence, and to men who wore pressed shirts and said they knew how to handle matters. The one person who never handled Maya as if she were a problem was her grandmother's sister, Elise Rivers Freeman, though everyone called her Aunt Thea. She was not truly an aunt by the strict accounting of blood, but families in the Low Country had older ways of naming the people who kept them alive. Aunt Thea lived in a weathered house outside Sheldon, where the yard held 2 pecan trees, a leaning smokehouse, and a line of indigo blue bottles turned upside down on cedar stakes to catch what the old people called restless wind. On Saturdays, when Lorna could borrow a car or find someone headed down that way, Maya was left at Aunt Thea's before breakfast and collected after sundown. Those Saturdays became the first honest pattern of her life. Aunt Thea was a dyer, a quilter, and a weaver of narrow cotton cloth on a table loom older than any living person in the family. Her hands were broad and knuckled, with palms darkened by decades of work and fingernails that carried a permanent blue half-moon at the edges. She wore cotton dresses with deep pockets, men's work shoes, and a white scarf tied over silver hair when she stirred the vat behind the shed. She did not hurry. Even her silence had a deliberate shape. The indigo shed stood behind her kitchen, beneath live oaks hung with gray moss that moved without wind. It was not the ruined place Maya would later buy, but a modest working shed of plank walls, screened vents, and a packed earth floor, worn smooth in a path between the vat, the rinse barrels, the drying rack, and the old table where Aunt Thea sorted cotton skeins. The place smelled of wet leaves, wood ash, iron, river mud, and something sharp beneath the sweetness, the living breath of fermentation. Maya's first task had been to sweep, then to carry water, then to rinse cloth in a galvanized tub until her arms ached and the blue ran paler in the water. Aunt Thea taught by requiring attention, not by offering praise. She showed Maya how to strip leaves from indigo stems without bruising them, how to pack them beneath warm water, weigh them with a clean brick, and cover the tub with a lid that fit close enough to hold heat but not so tight the whole living process would sour. She taught the difference between a sleeping vat and a dead one, between the bronze skin that formed on good liquor and the gray scum that meant neglect. Blue does not come when you call it, Aunt Thea said one September afternoon, as Maya stood on a crate and watched the dipped cotton emerge from the vat green as marsh grass before the air began turning it blue. Blue comes when it has been kept. Maya never forgot that. At first she understood it only as instruction. Later she would know it as a rule for grief, for skill, for family, for any beauty that has been forced underground and must be given time to breathe. Their ritual was exact. Biscuits at 7, sweeping by 7:30, water from the hand pump before the heat rose, leaves if the season was right, cotton if it was not. At noon Aunt Thea set out rice, okra, tomatoes, and whatever fish a neighbor had brought by wrapped in newspaper. After lunch, they worked more slowly. Aunt Thea told stories then, not the grand kind that begin with kings or storms, but quiet accounts of women with blue hands who had raised children, buried men, paid taxes, and kept cloth moving through their fingers when there was little else to leave behind. She spoke of Gullah families along the islands who carried language, songs, planting knowledge, and craft across years that had tried to erase them. She spoke carefully, never making sorrow into ornament. When she named the dead, she wiped the table afterward with the heel of her hand, as if even memory left a fine dust that should be treated with respect. Maya listened with her chin in her palm. The loom clicked. The moss shifted. Outside, egrets lifted from the marsh like pieces of torn white cloth. At 15, Maya was trusted with the small vat alone for the first time. Aunt Thea sat nearby, shelling peas into a chipped enamel bowl, while Maya checked the temperature, skimmed the bloom, lowered a tied bundle of cotton, and held it beneath the surface without splashing air into the liquor. When she lifted it out, the cloth hung green and plain in the afternoon light. Then, as oxygen touched it, blue spread slowly through the fibers. It did not arrive all at once. It deepened by patience. Aunt Thea nodded once. That nod fed Maya for a long time. When Aunt Thea died, it was not dramatic. There was no storm breaking over the roof, no strange bird tapping at a window, no final prophecy spoken from a pillow. She went to the hospital in Beaufort with fluid in her lungs and a church fan folded inside her purse, and 3 days later Lorna drove Maya there in borrowed silence. Aunt Thea's bed was already empty. Her scarf had been placed inside a clear plastic bag. Her work shoes sat beneath a chair, toes turned toward the door. The adults spoke in hallways. Maya stood beside a vending machine and counted the coins in her hand without seeing them. After the funeral, the heritage objects began disappearing with a steadiness that felt almost polite. Aunt Thea's table loom was taken for safekeeping by a cousin who had never woven a yard. The dye journals, with their brown covers and blue-stained page corners, were said to be missing. The quilt frames went into someone's truck. The brass thermometer vanished. A cedar box of seed envelopes, each labeled in Aunt Thea's careful hand, was not found at all. Lorna said there would be time to sort things properly. There was never time. By then, Elise Rivers had come into their lives like a person who arrived carrying a broom but left dustier footprints than anyone. She was Maya's older cousin, though she liked to say they were practically sisters when other people were listening. Celine had smooth hair, square red nails, and a way of dressing modestly that made every room feel accused of disorder. She kept folders in her purse. She knew the language of notaries, probate offices, bank tellers, and men at courthouse counters who trusted a woman who smiled without warmth and wrote dates correctly. Celine did not shout. She did not need to. Her cruelty was administrative. It wore reading glasses and carried receipts. She would sit at Lorna's kitchen table with papers spread before her, one hand resting on a calculator, and explain that Aunt Thea had been confused toward the end, that certain promises could not be proven, that family property needed a clear head, that grief made people imagine they were owed things. Maya learned the texture of being erased one document at a time. At first Celine spoke to her with a kind of soft dismissal. "You're young, baby. You don't understand these matters." Later, when the bank account had changed, when the deed copies had been filed, when Aunt Thea's remaining savings had been moved into channels Maya could not see, the softness thinned. Celine began opening drawers without asking. She took the blue scarf from Maya's dresser and said it belonged with family records. She took the shoebox of cloth samples and said damp storage would ruin them. She took Aunt Thea's photograph from the mantel and replaced it with a framed print of magnolias. Lorna watched these removals, as if from the far end of a road. Each time Maya turned to her, Lorna found a towel to fold or a pot to scrub. There are betrayals made of speech, and there are betrayals made of silence. The second kind lasts longer in a house. The eviction came on an October morning that smelled of rain, though none fell. Maya remembered the date because a church calendar still hung beside the refrigerator, turned to a picture of a white chapel under red maple leaves. She had been washing a cup at the sink when Celine entered with a man from the sheriff's office and a clipboard darkened by fingerprints along the metal clip. Lorna stood behind them in her work uniform, the collar bent on one side, her hands flat against her thighs. On the kitchen table sat a cardboard box. Maya recognized it as one from the grocery where her mother worked. The top flaps had been folded inward. Inside were 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a toothbrush, a cracked phone charger, a plastic pharmacy bag with her name written on it, and 1 folded dish towel Aunt Thea had woven in a pattern of narrow blue stripes. Nothing else. The man with the clipboard did not meet Maya's eyes. Celine did. She had placed the legal notice on top of the box, face up, as if it were the lid. This house is not yours anymore. Maya. Leave today. 8 words. Calmly said. Maya dried her hands on the front of her shirt because the towel had been packed. She looked at Lorna then, waiting for the one movement that would undo the morning. A lifted hand, a step forward, a word of correction. Lorna's face had the pale, tired stillness of bread dough before it rises. Her eyes stayed on the floor between them. She did not speak. Maya picked up the box. Outside, the porch boards were wet with blown mist. Someone had set Aunt Thea's potted rosemary beside the steps, though it was not in the box and therefore not hers to take. The plant leaned from lack of water. Maya stood looking at it until Celine reached around her and shut the door. For 6 weeks, Maya moved through South Carolina like a person trying not to leave a footprint. The first night she slept behind a closed laundromat in Walterboro, curled between a brick wall and a metal bin that smelled of dryer sheets, mildew, and spilled detergent. She kept the cardboard box under her arm until the damp softened one bottom corner and a shirt began to show through. By morning she had repacked what she could into a canvas tote given to her by a woman at a gas station who said nothing except, "This one's stronger." Maya thanked her twice. The woman waved the thanks away. She had $21.43 then, counting bus change and coins from the cloth purse. She wrote the amount on the back of a grocery receipt and folded it into the coin purse so she would have to face the arithmetic each time she spent. From Walterboro she took a bus to Charleston because cities, from a distance, looked as if they might hold answers. The bus windows were filmed with road dust, and the seat beneath her had a cut in the vinyl patched with silver tape. She arrived near evening and walked until her feet burned. That night she slept sitting up inside the bus station until a guard told her she could not stay unless she had a ticket. She bought the cheapest ticket she could, to North Charleston, and held it without boarding until dawn. In Charleston she learned which church doors opened for breakfast and which required names. She learned that public bathrooms could feel like mercy if they had soap. She washed her socks in a sink at the library on Calhoun Street and dried them beneath the hand dryer until another woman entered and pretended not to see. She spent $2 on a bowl of grits from a diner that served them in a paper cup through a side window. She ate with a plastic spoon under an awning while rain fell in silver lines beyond her shoes. Her money became $17.09. Then $13.62. Then $9 even, though one of those dollars had a corner missing and nobody wanted it. She went south because south meant closer to Aunt Thea's country, though she did not admit that to herself in words. A church van carried her as far as Yamasee after a volunteer noticed her standing too long by the road. The driver was an older man with cataracts beginning to cloud his left eye. He asked no questions after the first 2 went unanswered. At a rest stop he bought coffee and returned with a biscuit wrapped in a napkin, setting it on the seat between them as if it had been there all along. Near Yamasee she slept one night beneath the overhang of a closed feed store, listening to mice move inside the wall and trucks pass on wet pavement. Another night she slept in a stand of pines behind a motel, wrapped in the dish towel from Aunt Thea's loom, though it was too narrow to warm anything but her hands. She woke before light with pine needles in her hair and the taste of metal in her mouth from cold air. By the time she reached Beaufort, her shoes had begun to separate at the soles. The right one made a soft speaking sound with every step. She had $5.28, one blister under her heel, and a habit of lowering her eyes whenever anyone looked too long at her tote. Beaufort was gentler in appearance than the weeks that had brought her there. Houses with deep porches sat beneath live oaks. The river moved with a broad, tidal patience. Tourists walked slowly with paper cups and clean jackets, reading plaques and pointing at iron gates. Maya moved among them like a smudge on glass. She spent one night beneath the exterior stairs of a closed antique shop, where the boards above her held the day's remaining warmth for an hour, and then gave it up. The next morning she entered the Beaufort County Library because the doors opened early and nobody charged for sitting still. The library was not silent. Exactly. It hummed with fluorescent lights, soft footsteps, carts rolling over carpet, the turning of pages, the small coughs of people who had nowhere else to be warm. Maya chose a table near the local history shelves and placed her tote between her feet. For the first hour she did nothing but let her hands stop shaking. Then she walked to the bulletin board near the copy machine. There were flyers for piano lessons, a church fish fry, a missing orange cat, a caregiver support group, and a handwritten notice offering 2 cords of seasoned oak. Beneath those, pinned crookedly with a green thumbtack, was a county surplus notice printed on pale yellow paper. Condemned structure auction. 1 parcel with abandoned outbuilding. Former dye shed. Marsh edge. Dale area. Beaufort County. Minimum bid. Purchaser assumes all risk. Taxes. Repairs and removal orders. Inquire clerk's office by Friday. Maya read it 3 times. At first the words arranged themselves only as weathered facts. Condemned. Former. Risk. Repairs. Removal. Then one phrase held her still. Former dye shed. The letters seemed to darken on the paper as if they had absorbed water. She touched the notice with one finger, not pressing, merely confirming that it existed in the same world as her hand. $3. She had $5.28. She owed no one because no one would extend her trust. She had no address to put on a form, no plan that reached farther than the next meal, and no reason to believe the county would sell anything real to a girl with a torn shoe and a tote bag. Still, a thought arrived with a steadiness that did not belong to hunger or fear. Aunt Thea had said that blue came when it had been kept. Maya stood before the board until a man waiting for the copier cleared his throat. Then she pulled the notice free, folded it once, and carried it to the reference desk. The librarian there had cropped gray hair, a cardigan the color of oatmeal, and reading glasses on a chain. She looked at Maya's face, then at the paper, and softened without making a show of it. "The courthouse is 6 blocks," she said. "You'll want the county clerk, not tax records first. They close at 4:30. Maya nodded. The librarian reached beneath the desk and brought out a bus schedule, though Maya had not asked for one. "And there is water in the hall," she added. "Cold from the left tap." Maya filled her bottle twice in the hallway. She counted her money in a stall with the door latched, $5.28. If she paid $3, she would have $2.28. Enough for 1 cheap biscuit, perhaps 2 if she found the right place. Not enough for safety. But safety had become an expensive word. It required relatives, rooms, working locks, papers in one's name. She had none of those. She had $3. By noon, the sky had cleared into a flat winter brightness. Maya stood on the library steps with the folded notice in her coat pocket and watched cars pass in clean lanes toward offices, shops, and houses where people knew which drawer held the spare keys. Her right shoe opened and closed at the toe. The tote strap cut into her shoulder. Somewhere beyond the town, beyond the courthouse, beyond the road she did not yet know how to find, a ruined shed waited beside marsh water with county tape on its door and rain in its roof. She began walking. The decision did not feel brave. It felt exact. She had come to the end of every place that had been offered to her, and the only door left was one everybody else had already refused. The courthouse steps were still wet from the morning mist when Maya climbed them, one hand on the cold rail and the folded notice pressed flat inside her coat pocket. She did not go in at first. People moved around her with the confidence of errands that belonged to them. Men in work boots carried envelopes under their arms. A woman in a navy skirt spoke into her phone while balancing a stack of permit folders against her hip. 2 county employees came out together, laughing quietly over something already finished. Maya stood aside near a brick column and watched the glass doors open and close, each time releasing a breath of warm air that smelled faintly of copy paper, floor wax, and rainwater tracked in from the street. There are places built to make a person aware of what she cannot prove. Courthouses are among them. Their walls ask for names, dates, signatures, addresses, histories. They ask a body to become legible. Maya had spent 6 weeks becoming less legible each day, until even her own handwriting looked uncertain to her. She had no lease, no bank statement, no school identification that was not bent at the corners. She had a state card with an older address, a birth certificate folded into a plastic sleeve, and a fear that paperwork could take from her what hunger had left behind. Still, she entered. Inside, the floor was pale stone worn dull by decades of shoes. A security officer pointed without impatience toward a table where she placed her tote, emptied her pockets, and stepped through a metal detector that chirped once at the loose eyelet in her shoe. He examined the folded notice, not reading it fully, then gave it back with 2 fingers. Clerk's office is left. Then second door. Yes, sir. The clerk's office had a low counter, 3 service windows, a row of plastic chairs, and a wall clock whose second hand advanced in careful little jerks. Behind the counter were shelves of ledgers, binders, blue file boxes, and a printer that sighed every few minutes as if tired of its own labor. A woman at the first window argued softly about a lien. An older man sat with both hands around a cane, waiting for his number to appear on a red display. Maya took a paper ticket from the dispenser. Number 36. She sat with the folded notice in her lap and her tote hooked around one ankle. The room was warm enough that dampness rose from her shoes, carrying with it the smell of pine needles and sidewalk grit. She studied the notice again, though she nearly knew it by memory now. Former dye shed. Purchaser assumes all risk. Removal orders. Inquire. When her number appeared, she walked to the far window. The clerk behind the glass was a compact woman near 60. With brown skin, silver hair cut close to her head, and gold-framed glasses resting low on her nose. Her cardigan was the deep green of bottle glass, and on the counter beside her keyboard sat a nameplate polished by long use. MRS. Evelyn Baptisti. Cancanti. A small ceramic dish near the nameplate held paper clips sorted by size. Maya slid the notice under the gap in the glass. Mrs. Baptiste lowered her eyes. Read it, then looked at Maya's face for a longer moment than most people allowed themselves. It was not suspicion exactly. It was a practiced attention, the kind women sometimes develop after years of watching people arrive at counters with their lives in envelopes. You are here about the surplus parcel. Yes. Mom. You came before the deadline. Yes. Mom. You have identification. Maya placed the state card and the folded birth certificate on the counter. Her fingers looked narrow and pale with cold against the worn plastic sleeve. Mrs. Baptiste examined both. She typed. The keyboard made a dry tapping sound, deliberate and even. Then she turned in her chair, pulled a file from a stack, and opened it with both hands. You understand this is not a house? Yes. Mom. You understand it has no certificate of occupancy? Yes. Mom. You understand the county has declared the structure Yes. Mom. You understand there is no water line in service, no electric meter, no septic approval, and no promise that any part of the building can be saved. Yes. Mom. Mrs. Baptiste looked over the top of her glasses. You understand that if you sign the taxes, the liability, the demolition notice, the snakes, the roof, the marsh, the mosquitoes, and whatever else has been living in there become your concern. Maya swallowed once. Yes. Mom. The clerk did not smile. She leaned back, folded her hands, and let the silence settle between them. Child, she said. Not unkindly, some things are sold cheap because they are not gifts. Maya looked down at the notice. One corner had softened where her thumb had worried it during the walk. I know. You have somewhere else to go today. The question was hidden inside a statement. Maya knew it and did not know how to honor it except by answering plainly. No. Mom. Mrs. Baptiste removed her glasses, cleaned one lens with the edge of her cardigan, and put them back on. For a moment the office sounds seemed to recede behind her. The printer, the wall clock, the low voices, the shuffling of paper. Then she reached for a form from a tray marked surplus transfer. Then we will do this carefully. The paperwork took longer than Maya expected. There were pages about assumption of risk, pages about taxes, pages requiring initials beside warnings written in square, official language. Mrs. Baptiste read each paragraph aloud in a voice that made no room for speed. Maya signed where she was told, using a black pen attached to the counter by a silver chain. Her signature looked too young on the deed transfer. The letters leaned unevenly, as if they had walked too far. When the fee was due, Maya opened the cloth coin purse with both hands. She placed the bills flat on the counter and smoothed each one before sliding them forward. Mrs. Baptiste did not count them in a way that could shame a person. She counted once, quietly, then wrote a receipt by hand in addition to printing one from the machine. The printer produced its paper with a faint mechanical groan. Then came the stamp. Mrs. Baptiste took a heavy brass seal from the rear of the counter and centered the deed beneath it. The tool was darker at the handle where years of palms had warmed and polished the metal. She pressed down with her shoulder, and the seal struck the paper with a firm, round sound, not loud but final. The raised county mark appeared beneath Maya's name. It was the first time in many weeks that something official had not taken from her. The paper lay there, plain and severe, saying she belonged to a place that nobody else wanted. Mrs. Baptiste placed the deed, receipt, warning notice, and a photocopied map into a manila envelope. She drew a route in blue ink, from the courthouse to Boundary Street, then toward the bridge road, Then south along the older county route where the pavement narrowed and the signs became less helpful. She named a church with a white steeple, an abandoned bait shop, a culvert with rusted rails, and a live oak split by lightning. "You will pass the turn twice if you look for a proper sign," she said. There is not one. There used to be a board nailed to a walnut tree. It may still be there, or the tree may have eaten most of it. Yes. Mom, do not go by the marsh after dark without a light. Yes. Mom, do not step where grass has grown overboard. Yes. Mom, do not trust the floor near the vat. Maya's fingers tightened on the envelope before she could stop them. Mrs. Baptiste noticed. You know what a vat? Yes. Mom. The clerk's face changed then. Not much, but enough. A small stillness entered her eyes. She turned back to the identification card on the counter, looked again at Maya's last name, then at the deed where it had been typed in fresh black letters. Rivers, she said. Maya waited. Mrs. Baptiste touched the edge of the deed, aligning it with the receipt, though it was already straight. There was a Rivers woman used to bring cloth into town when I was a girl. Blue handkerchiefs, table runners, church sashes, all dyed so deep they looked like evening folded up. Maya kept her gaze on the counter. The sound of the name inside the clerk's mouth made the room feel fragile. She was kin to you. Yes. Mom. Mrs. Baptiste was quiet for several seconds. She came in once with a basket of cloth and a little girl beside her. The child had 2 braids and would not speak above a whisper. I remember because the older woman paid a filing fee in quarters, all stacked in paper rolls. She made me count twice. Maya touched the manila envelope with the tips of her fingers. That might have been me. It was, Mrs. Baptiste's voice lowered. You had blue on your cuffs. Neither of them moved. In another room a phone rang 3 times and stopped. Mrs. Baptiste opened a drawer beneath the counter. From it she took a narrow flashlight, a county road maintenance pencil, and a folded sheet of paper with emergency numbers printed at the top. She slid them under the glass. The flashlight is mine, she said. Bring it back when you can. Maya shook her head. I can't take. You can. The words were not warm. They were better than warm. They were exact. Maya placed the flashlight in her tote. Mrs. Baptiste took the deed envelope, tapped its edge once on the counter to settle the pages, and handed it to her. You keep that dry, she said. Yes. Mom. And girl. Maya looked up. If the road is too far, you come back here before 4:30. I can call the church office. Somebody will know a porch. Maya nodded, but she knew she would not return. Not because pride had any strength left in her. Pride had been spent early and poorly. She would not return because the manila envelope in her hands had begun to weigh like a door key. And after a season of being moved from threshold to threshold, she could not bear to hand it back to safety before seeing what it opened. Outside, the afternoon had gone sharp and bright. Clouds moved inland in long pale streaks, and the air smelled of salt, wet brick, and the exhaust of idling cars. Maya stood beneath the courthouse live oak and examined the map. The walking route was longer than it had appeared under fluorescent light. There were places where sidewalks ended, places where traffic would run fast along the shoulder, places where the marsh road bent through open land with no houses near enough to ask. She folded the map into fourths and put it inside the envelope. Before leaving town, she used one of her remaining coins on a paper cup of coffee from a gas station because the air had begun to settle into her bones. She added no sugar, though packets were free, because sweetness felt like something for later. In the small grocery next door, she walked past oranges, crackers, soup cans, and loaves of bread marked with colored twist ties, calculating each possibility against what remained in her purse. At last she bought one plain roll from the day-old basket. The cashier, a young man with tired eyes and a silver cross on a chain, put 2 rolls in the paper bag and rang only one. Maya noticed. He did not look up. The walk out of Beaufort began among houses with painted shutters, garden walls, and porches furnished for sitting. Then the road widened. The river appeared in glimpses between buildings, gray-blue under a sky that had lost its morning softness. Cars passed in bursts, pressing wind against her coat. She kept to the shoulder when the sidewalk ended, the tote strap crossing her chest, the deed envelope held inside her coat to keep it from bending. Her right shoe spoke at every step. By late afternoon, town had thinned behind her. She passed a seafood market with darkened tanks, a tire shop with 4 chairs outside its office, a closed barber shop painted pale yellow, a bait-and-tackle store where the sign had faded pink at the edges, and a roadside cafe with steamed windows and a chalkboard advertising shrimp stew. The smell of the stew followed her for nearly a block. She did not go in. Farther on, a small church stood behind a chain-link fence. Its signboard named Sunday service and Wednesday choir practice. A man in a brown jacket was sweeping leaves from the front walk, moving them into patient piles, though the wind kept taking the edges. He watched Maya pass. "You need directions." "Miss." She stopped because refusing kindness can become another kind of poverty. "I'm looking for the old marsh road past the culvert." His broom paused. "That is a long walk." "Yes, sir." "Nothing down that way but hunting land and camp." She held the envelope closer. "I have a map." He looked at her shoes, then at the lowering light. "Keep left after the bait shop with the green roof. Dogs at the Simmons place will bark, but they're fenced. If you hear loose ones, stand still." "Thank you." He nodded once and returned to sweeping, though his eyes stayed on the road until she had gone beyond the churchyard. The bait shop with the green roof appeared after another mile, though it had not sold bait in years. Its windows were boarded from inside, and a plastic minnow bucket hung from a nail by the door, faded almost white. Maya turned left there. The pavement narrowed and the shoulder became sand, then grass. Pine woods pressed in for a while, full of brown needles, gallberry, and the damp mineral smell of low ground. A red-tailed hawk crossed above the road without a sound. The temperature fell with the sun. Not quickly. Deliberately, as if the cold were taking inventory of her coat, her sleeves, her thin socks, and every seam that could admit it. She had hoped to reach the shed by dark, but hope had poor legs. The map's distances were clean lines on paper. The road's distances lived in the soles of her feet. By the time she reached the rusted culvert, dusk had gathered blue in the ditches. Water moved below through reeds, reflecting a strip of pale sky. On the far side stood the lightning-split oak missus. Baptiste had named. Its wound had healed over in thick black lips of bark. The old marsh road bent beyond it. Maya followed. The first house she passed had oyster shells lining the drive and a porch light already burning. 2 dogs began barking before she reached the mailbox. The sound came hard and deep, but the fence held. A woman appeared behind a screen door, looked out, and then vanished without opening it. Maya kept walking, neither faster nor slower. After that, the houses spread farther apart. One yard held a row of rusted crab traps. Another had 3 walnut trees standing leafless near a shed roof silvered by weather. Smoke rose from a chimney in a straight dark thread. Somewhere a radio played an old gospel song, so faint the words arrived only as lifted vowels in the steady handclap of rhythm. The land seemed to lower itself toward water with every step. She smelled the marsh before she saw it. It came as salt and mud, as rotting grass, as cold water hidden beyond reeds, as the mineral breath of things left covered and then uncovered by tide. The sound changed, too. Traffic had disappeared. In its place were small, exact noises, water clicking under roots, insects ticking in dry grass, a bird calling once from the darkening edge, her own shoe opening and closing. At the walnut tree, she nearly missed the turn. The board Mrs. Baptiste had mentioned was still there, but barely. The tree had grown around both ends, swallowing the sign so the weathered plank seemed to emerge from bark like a bone from skin. Only 3 letters remained visible beneath lichen and moss. D.I. Maya stood before it until the last light thinned enough that the letters became harder to read. Then she took Mrs. Baptiste's flashlight from her tote and pressed the rubber switch. A narrow beam opened over the ground. The drive was not truly a drive anymore. It was 2 ruts filled with leaves, sand, and winter grass, leading between wax myrtle and yaupon toward the dark shine of marsh beyond. Blackberry canes had arched over part of the way. She used the flashlight to find footing, lifting her shoes over roots and broken branches. Twice she stopped because something moved in the brush. Twice it was only the brush moving by itself. Then the shed appeared. At first it was a shape darker than the trees behind it. Then the beam found tin, plank, stone, and shadow. The building stood on low brick piers near the marsh edge. Rectangular and narrow, perhaps 24 feet by 32, with a roof of rusted corrugated metal patched in places by older tin flattened from cans and nailed beneath cedar battens. The walls were cypress boards, some vertical, some replaced long ago by pine that had aged to a different gray. One corner had settled lower than the rest, making the whole roof line dip toward the water. A short brick chimney rose at the rear, crooked but standing. The front door hung from one hinge and had been crossed by county tape, now faded from orange to a tired peach. Above it, fixed beneath the eave, was a hand-painted sign so worn that the letters seemed less written than remembered. Rivers, Indigo, and Cotton. Maya did not move for a full minute. The name on the sign was not proof of belonging. Names could travel. Families could split. Records could be wrong. A person could be made foolish by wanting too much from coincidence. Still, the sight of those letters, weathered and patient above the broken door, placed a hand somewhere inside her chest and held it there. She climbed the 2 front steps carefully. The first bowed under her weight but did not break. The second was sound at one end and soft at the other. She stepped near the nail line because Aunt Thea had once told her that boards were strongest where someone had fixed them with intention. The door opened with a long scrape across the threshold. Inside, the air was colder than outside. It had been kept from the day's sun and held the smell of closed wood, marsh damp, old ash, mouse nests, and iron. Maya stood in the doorway until her eyes adjusted around the flashlight beam. Dust crossed the light in slow, drifting lines. Something small moved behind the wall and stopped. The front room had once been used for work that could be done in daylight. There was a long table beneath the left windows, its top warped and split but still holding a row of wooden pegs along one edge. A broken chair lay on its side near the wall. Shelves had been built between studs and held empty jars. A cracked crock, a roll of brittle twine, and a single glass bottle stained blue at the bottom. On the floor were leaves blown in through gaps, a rusted hinge, a bird's nest fallen from the rafters, and several acorns opened cleanly by mice. The walls had no insulation. Between the boards, narrow lines of evening showed like pale thread. The windows were clouded with dirt and salt, and one had lost its glass entirely, leaving only teeth of old putty around the sash. Above, the rafters were blackened in places by age and smoke. Water had come through the roof often enough to darken the floor in irregular shapes. Maya stepped once. The floor answered with a creak that carried through the room and disappeared beneath the rear partition. She waited, listening for the answering crack of failure. None came. She stepped again. Beyond the front room was a wider back room, lower and more shadowed, where the true labor of the place had lived. The flashlight found the vat before anything else. It stood slightly off-center, huge and round, made of cypress staves bound by iron hoops gone brown with rust. Its rim rose nearly to Maya's ribs. A wooden lid, built in two halves, covered most of the opening, though one side had warped upward and left a dark crescent where the interior breathed out a smell of sour wood, mineral salt, and something faintly vegetal, as if the memory of leaves had not entirely departed. Beside it were two smaller tubs, a draining rack, and a sloped platform that led toward a gap in the floor where wastewater had once run out toward the marsh. The warning came back to her, do not trust the floor near the vat. She stayed by the doorway. The back room held less clutter but more presence. Hooks hung from ceiling beams. A pulley, green with corrosion, was fixed above the vat. A long stirring paddle leaned in the corner, its handle polished dark where hands had held it. On a shelf near the chimney sat a row of stones, each wrapped once with blue thread so faded it had gone nearly gray. The chimney mouth below them was packed with bird debris and broken brick. Maya turned slowly, sweeping the beam from wall to wall. The shed did not welcome her. It did not reject her either. It waited in a condition beyond opinion. Hunger returned then with a plainness that made her knees feel hollow. She went back to the front room, sat on the least damp section of floor near the wall, and opened the paper bag from the grocery. The two rolls had flattened during the walk. She ate one in small bites, saving the second, though her body wanted it. Crumbs fell into her lap. She picked them up with a wet finger and ate those too. There was no electricity. No water except what remained in her bottle. No blanket except the woven dish towel folded in her tote. The flashlight beam had already begun to yellow at the edges, so she turned it off and let the dark come nearer. For a while, she could still see the windows, pale rectangles holding what remained of the sky. Then even those faded. The shed became sound and temperature. Water moved beyond the walls. A loose strip of tin ticked against the roof when the wind shifted. Somewhere in the rafters, a mouse made careful progress over dry leaves. The floor beneath Maya's hip was hard and cold, but it was not sidewalk, not bus station, not the damp ground behind a motel. It was a floor with her name folded in a county envelope beside her. She took the deed from inside her coat and placed it beneath her shirt, between cloth and skin, to keep the paper warm and dry through the night. Then she lay down with her tote under her head. The woven dish towel covered her hands. Her shoes stayed on because the room belonged to spiders, splinters, and whatever else had claimed it during the years when no person slept there. Cold traveled up from the boards. It entered slowly, finding bone by bone. She drew her knees toward her chest and listened to the marsh breathing outside. The night smelled of cypress, rust, damp cotton, old smoke, and the faint bitter trace of indigo left somewhere in wood no county order had been able to erase. Near midnight, rain began. not hard rain. A careful rain. It found the roof's 5 seams and entered at each one, falling into the room with separate voices. One drip struck metal. One struck wood. One found a leaf and made a soft papery sound. One landed near the threshold. One, far back in the dye room, fell at intervals so slow that Maya began waiting for it without meaning to. She did not sleep much. When she did, it was in brief pieces, each one broken by cold or sound or the ache in her feet. Once she woke certain that someone had spoken her name, but it was only the loose tin ticking and the marsh grass rubbing against itself. Once she reached for the scarf that was no longer hers and found instead the dish towel, narrow and blue stripe beneath her fingers. Toward morning, the rain stopped. A gray light entered through the broken window, thin but honest. Maya opened her eyes and saw dust on the floorboards, water in a shallow pan she had not noticed the night before, and one bright green fern growing from a crack near the hearth where wind had carried soil and spores. It stood there impossibly tender, its small fronds uncurling in the cold. She sat up slowly. The shed had been waiting, and so had she. By first light, Maya learned that the well did not sit where she expected it. She had gone out with Mrs. Baptista's flashlight in one hand and the empty bottle in the other, following a narrow footpath that left the rear steps and bent toward a stand of wax myrtle. The marsh lay low and pewter-colored beyond the grass, breathing under a skin of fog. Every sound carried in the morning damp, water slipping through reeds, a crow knocking its harsh call from a pine, the soft complaint of her right shoe. The well was not behind the shed, as it had been at Aunt Thea's place. It stood to the north, half hidden beneath trumpet vine and thorn, a round brick collar capped with warped boards and a square of corrugated tin weighted down by 2 stones. Maya brushed leaves away from the rim and found a hand pump bolted to a short iron pipe. The handle was stiff. The leather inside had dried or swollen or both. She worked it 27 times before the pipe answered with a cough from underground. The first water came out brown. She let it run into the weeds until it cleared to a faint tea color, then clearer still, cold enough to numb the hand that held the bottle. She smelled it, tasted 1 drop, waited, then filled the bottle and set it aside. The county papers had made no promise about potability. She would boil it when she had a fire, and until then she would use it only for washing. The outhouse stood farther back, screened by elderberry and a collapsed length of fence. One hinge had given way, and the door leaned inward like a tired shoulder. Inside were spider webs, paper wasp nests abandoned for winter, and a wooden seat rubbed smooth by hands in years. Maya cleaned it with a stick, then with leaves, then with a torn strip from the hem of one shirt she could spare. She found a coffee can full of lime powder beneath the seat, hardened at the top but usable below when broken with a stone. She made rules for herself, because rules could hold a morning together. Do not step beside the vat. Do not drink unboiled well water. Do not use the flashlight unless needed. Keep the deed wrapped in plastic. Count money once at dawn, once at dark, never more. Check the roof drips after rain. Test each board before trusting it. Leave the front door open during daylight so air can pass through. Sleep with shoes on. For 3 days, she learned the language of the floor. The front room had 5 safe lines of travel. 1 from door to table. 1 from table to hearth. 1 from hearth to the broken chair. 1 narrow diagonal toward the rear partition. 1 along the wall where the studs still held firm. The board spoke differently beneath each step. A high, thin creak meant age. A low groan meant weight shifting below. A hollow clack meant empty space. A soft sigh meant rot, and rot was never to be argued with. She marked danger with bits of string and broken charcoal. Near the vat she did not walk at all, but knelt at the edge of the back room and tapped the planks ahead with a fallen lath. The great cypress barrel sat in its settled authority, iron hoops rusting, lid warped, its shadow round and patient over the floor. Once, when morning light struck it through a gap in the wall, the vat stave showed faint blue stains running downward like old rain. The first day she cleared leaves from the front room and shook 3 mouse nests from a broken drawer. The second day she carried out fallen plaster, cracked jars, 2 rotted baskets, and the remains of a bird that had found its way in and not found its way out. The third day she sorted what might be saved from what could not: nails, hinges, intact bottles, a cracked crock, a tin cup, 4 wooden pegs, and a length of cotton rope stiff with salt air. Her hunger settled into a schedule. It rose in the morning, sharpened at noon, dulled by evening, and returned in the night as a small animal moving behind her ribs. She ate the second roll in 4 portions over 2 days. On the third afternoon, she walked back toward the nearest road with the deed envelope tucked inside her coat, meaning to find the hardware store named on Mrs. Baptista's emergency paper. She did not know what she could buy. She only knew she needed matches, a small pot, and advice she could not invent. The road to Dale Hardware and Feed took nearly an hour on foot. The store sat where 2 narrow roads crossed beside a drainage ditch lined with winter grass. It was a long, low building with a green metal roof, a front porch held by peeled cedar posts, and windows filled with hand-lettered cards: kerosene, seed potatoes, well parts, storm lantern wicks, galvanized nails. A bell over the door gave 1 careful ring when Maya entered. The place smelled of oiled metal, burlap, seed corn, pine boards, paint thinner, and coffee kept too long on a hot plate. Narrow aisles ran between shelves stacked to the ceiling. Glass jars held washers and cotter pins. Pegboards carried saw blades, trowels, pliers, chalk lines, files, and hammers with ash handles. Against the back wall stood sacks of feed and lime in stiff paper bags, and near the counter a pot-bellied stove gave off a heat so steady that Maya stopped near it without meaning to. The man behind the counter looked up from repairing a lantern. He was tall and spare, with a narrow face, copper-brown skin, and a white beard cut square under his chin. One ear was folded slightly at the top, as if from an old injury. His shirt sleeves were rolled above his wrists, and his hands were long, dry, and exact, the hands of someone who had spent decades trusting measurements more than talk. "Afternoon," he said. "Afternoon. Sir, you are the girl bought the Rivers place." It was not a question. In a community that size, a county deed traveled faster than mail. "Yes, sir. I am Jonah Bellamy." He set the lantern aside and wiped his fingers on a cloth. "My father sold nails to that shop when there was still cloth coming out of it." Maya stood just inside the warmth, unsure whether to move closer. "I need to make it safe enough to sleep in." That is a different sentence from fixing it. "Yes, sir. I know." He watched her for a moment, then came around the counter with a limp so slight it appeared only when he turned. "What have you got?" She opened her tote. There was the deed envelope, the bottle of well water, the cloth purse, Aunt Thea's woven dish towel, the county flashlight, and the small pile of salvage she had brought to identify: a hinge, 2 nails, a rusted latch, and a blue-stained wooden peg. "Mr." Bellamy picked up the peg first. His thumb rested on the color. They hung skeins from these after the first rinse. Maya nodded. You got water. The pump works. Fireplace. Chimney is blocked. Roof. Leaks in several seams. Floor. Bad near the vat. That floor was bad near the vat before I had gray in my beard. He set the peg down. Do not trust a board just because it held yesterday. I won't. You got money. Maya opened the coin purse and placed the remaining amount on the counter because guessing would be worse. $2.28 lay there in coins and the torn corner bill. The store became very still around it. Mr. Bellamy did not touch the money. He looked toward the stove, then toward the shelves, then back at Maya. I do accounts for people who intend to pay. Maya kept her hands beside the purse. I intend to pay. With what income? I do not know yet. That is an honest answer. Not a useful one. No, sir. He took a card from a drawer, wrote her name at the top, and made a straight line beneath it. Then we will begin with small debt and careful work. You buy nothing pretty, nothing convenient, only what keeps weather and fever away. Maya looked at the account card as if it were another deed. You would do that? My mother said your aunt mended church cloth after the hurricane and would not take payment from widows. He slid the card into a wooden file box. I am not doing charity. I am returning a balance. The first account was modest. A box of kitchen matches, 15 cents. One used tin saucepan with a dented side, 50 cents. 2 candles, 10 cents each. A stiff wire chimney brush meant for a narrow flue, 75 cents. Marked down because the handle had been bent. 1 pair of second-hand leather gloves, 30 cents. A packet of 8-penny common nails, 12 cents. A small cake of lye soap, 9 cents. Cotton rags from a flour sack. No charge written, though Mr. Bellamy marked the card with a single dash as if the absence were accounted for. He added a thin booklet from beneath the counter. Its cover was soft from handling and printed in black letters, Repairing Old Homes, Basic Meters for Owners of Limited Means. The pages smelled of dust and dry glue. That is not for sale, he said. Bring it back when you know more than it does. Maya took it with both hands. He pointed to the first chapter with the lantern screwdriver. Read safety first. Then chimney. A cold house can kill you slow. A dirty chimney can kill you fast. Yes, sir. You have creosote. Bird nest. Maybe cracked tile. You do not build a fire until you clean from top and bottom, inspect with light, and make sure draft pulls. Yes, sir. You know how to get on that roof. No, sir. Good. Do not get on it today. He packed everything into a paper sack and tied it with string. Before she left, he added 3 potatoes from a crate near the feed sacks. This time he did write them down, potatoes. 3. Account. Debt is easier to carry when it has a name, he said. Maya carried the sack back against her chest, feeling the shape of the saucepan through the paper. The late afternoon was colder than the day before, and the sky had gathered a pewter lid over the marsh. By the time she reached the shed, her arms ached, but the sight of the door did not strike her as it had the first night. It was not yet shelter in the full sense. It had become a task. She began with the chimney the next morning. The booklet instructed her to close the room, cover the hearth opening, work from the top if safe, and never assume a flue was clear because daylight could be seen through it. Since the roof was not safe, she did what Mr. Bellamy had called the poor woman's first pass. She tied the bent chimney brush to the length of stiff cotton rope she had found, weighted the end with a rusted hinge, and worked from below, pushing and twisting into the flue a few inches at a time. The first fall of soot came down like black flour. She stepped back coughing, tears running from the corners of her eyes, though she had tied a damp rag across her mouth. Creosote clung to the old brick in shiny, tarry ridges. Birdgrass, pine needles, twigs, and a small piece of blue thread came down in handfuls. She laid the debris on a flat board and sorted it with the caution of someone who had very little and could not afford disgust. The dry nest went into a pile for later kindling. The black creosote she carried out and buried beyond the outhouse, because the booklet warned that it could burn hot and mean. It took 6 hours the first day, 4 the next. On the third, she borrowed more daylight by propping a broken mirror shard near the hearth and angling it toward the flue while Mrs. Baptiste's flashlight shone upward from below. She could see rough brick, gaps in mortar, and one place where the inner surface had scaled away, but no total blockage. She cleaned again, slower. She worked the brush in circles until her arms trembled. She scraped the smoke shelf with a flat piece of iron found under the work table. She swept the firebox with a bundle of reeds tied at one end. When she finally tested the draft, she did it as the booklet said. She lit a twist of newspaper at the hearth and held it near the throat without setting it down. The smoke hesitated, flattened, then lifted. It did not roll back into the room. It climbed. Maya watched it go as if it were a small prayer that had found the right direction. For the first fire, she used only a careful handful of dry twigs, 3 strips of nest grass, and 2 broken pieces of pine from a fallen shelf. No paper except the twist used to start it. No large wood. No faith beyond what the draft had earned. The flame took slowly, blue at its base, yellow at the tips, licking the old brick without roar. She crouched before it with the used saucepan balanced on 2 stones and boiled well water for 10 full minutes because the booklet's margin, in someone else's handwriting, said, "Do not cheat water." Into that water she put 1 potato, sliced thin with a pocket knife from the store counter that Mr. Bellamy had lent and written down as tool. Return. She added a pinch of salt from a paper twist he had included without comment. The potato softened. The water clouded. The smell rose plain and earthy into the room. Her first hot meal in the shed was not much. It was potato water in a dented pan, eaten with the pocket knife tip because she had no spoon. Still, heat entered her hands from the metal. Steam touched her face. The fire made a small speaking sound in the hearth, and the room changed around it. Not repaired, not kind, but less indifferent. That night she slept nearer the hearth, waking twice to feed 1 stick at a time into the embers. The roof still leaked. The walls still breathed cold. The back room remained dark and unsafe, but the air no longer felt abandoned to itself. On the 4th morning after buying supplies, she began a full inventory of the workroom. She had learned enough of the floor to enter by the left wall, placing her feet only where the planks crossed joists beneath. She carried charcoal, string, and a page torn from the back of the booklet for notes. She numbered the room as Aunt Thea had once numbered dye samples, not by worth, but by location. On the north wall 6 iron hooks, 3 sound, 2 loose, 1 missing its point. 1 pulley mounted into a beam, wheel frozen but not broken. 1 shelf holding blue-threaded stones, 7 total, each smooth river rock weighted for cloth. 1 cracked stoneware jar with dried sediment at the bottom, blue-black and bitter-smelling. 1 wooden frame for stretching narrow cotton, missing 2 pegs. On the east wall, the chimney breast, blackened at mouth, brick spalling at the lower right corner. 1 pair of tongs. 1 ash shovel with a split handle. One rusted coffee tin full of rosehead nails, many still usable if straightened. A broken thermometer face without mercury tube. A wedge of beeswax wrapped in cloth so old it had stiffened. On the south side near the marsh window, a draining rack of cypress slats. Collapsed but complete. 2 smaller tubs, one split beyond repair, one dry but tight when she tapped it. A bundle of cane reeds tied with cotton cord. 3 empty seed trays. A shallow tray lined with old mesh for drying leaves. 1 tobacco sack containing cotton lint that had gone gray with time. On the west wall, the great vat, the sloped wastewater platform, and the danger area. She wrote those words exactly. Danger area. The vat's lid was heavier than it looked. Maya did not lift it yet. She ran her fingers lightly over the rim, feeling where hands had rested for decades, where tools had struck, where dried minerals had formed a pale crust in the grain. The iron hoops had loosened but not failed. The staves had opened at the top in narrow black lines, though cypress was patient wood and slow to surrender. On one side, near the base, a carved cedar disc had been set into the floorboards beside the vat, no wider than a saucer. At first she took it for a knot in the plank. Then light shifted, and she saw that the grain ran crosswise to the board around it. Not natural. Placed. She knelt outside the marked line and tapped with the pocket knife handle. The planks near the vat gave their low warning groan. She moved back. Then she reached with the long stirring paddle and tapped the cedar disc itself. The sound was different. Not hollow exactly. Contained. A sealed sound, shorter than the surrounding boards, with a heaviness beneath it that did not belong to simple flooring. Maya waited. Nothing moved. She tapped again, then used the paddle to press along the disc's edge. It did not shift. She tested the floor from another angle, working from the wall where the joist line held better. She placed one knee on a soundboard, one hand against the wall stud, and leaned only enough to examine the disc closely. Its rim had been darkened with age, but beneath the dust she found a narrow groove. A plug. Cedar set into pine. The anomaly did not announce itself. It only refused to match the world around it. She returned to the front room and read the booklet's chapter on flooring, not because it mentioned hidden compartments, but because it named the parts beneath her feet: plank, joist, sleeper, blocking, sill. Words steadied the hand. Then she gathered what she had: the pocket knife, the hinge, a straightened nail, the gloves, the wire brush, and a strip of cloth to keep small pieces from falling through gaps. By late morning she had cleared the dust around the cedar disc. By noon she had worked the nail into the groove and found it too soft to pry. By early afternoon she had sharpened the edge of the broken hinge against a brick until it made a poor blade. She eased it into the groove and pressed. The cedar did not move. She did not force it. A broken plug could ruin whatever mechanism or seal had kept it safe. She sat back on her heels, sweating despite the cold, and studied the vat. Aunt Thea had once hidden a spare key beneath a loose tread, but not directly beneath the tread. She had placed it under the third nail head from the left because thieves looked for loose boards and children looked for patterns. Craft people, she had said, respected misdirection because nature did. Maya looked again. The cedar disc sat beside the vat, not under it, too obvious for a hiding place, perhaps, and too strange to be nothing. She examined the blue-threaded stones on the shelf. 7 stones. She carried them one by one and placed them near the disc, not yet knowing why. Each had been wrapped differently: 1 loop, 2 loops, a crossing, a knot. The fourth stone had a small iron pin hidden beneath its thread, dark with age. She drew the pin free. It fit the groove in the cedar disc as if made for it. Maya pressed gently. The disc turned a quarter-inch beneath her hand. Not up. Around. She turned it slowly until it stopped. Somewhere beneath the floor, a wooden latch gave a dry click that seemed too small to have survived so many years. The sound traveled through the boards into her knees. For a long time, she did nothing. Then she slid the long, stirring paddle beneath the edge of the nearest plank, the one that had looked fixed but now showed a hairline seam. It lifted with a sigh of dust. Beneath it was not open crawl space, but a second surface cypress boards fitted tight, tarred at the seams, and covered by a layer of oilcloth gone stiff and black. Maya opened only what the mechanism allowed. 3 floorboards rose together, hinged on the far side, so carefully balanced that even after years of damp they did not crack. The opening beneath was rectangular, roughly 4 feet by 3, framed in cypress and lined with tin. It had been built below the vat platform where the shadow and danger of the heavy barrel would keep casual feet away. Inside were packages. Not many. Not treasure in the storybook sense. No jewels, no gold bars, no velvet cases. There were oilcloth bundles tied with cotton cord, a cedar box, a flat parcel wrapped in waxed canvas, a small tin trunk with a brass hasp, and 3 cloth sacks darkened by age. Everything had been packed with dry cedar shavings and tobacco leaves against insects. The smell that rose was sharp, old, and strangely clean. Maya did not touch anything at first. She sat beside the opening until the light moved from one wall to another and the room cooled around her. She had lived too long with loss to trust the first appearance of being given something. Her hands rested on her knees. The vat stood above the compartment, its cypress staves holding silence. At last she lifted the smallest bundle. The cord broke under her fingers. She unwrapped oilcloth, then a layer of muslin, and found tools nested inside a bone folder, 2 wooden shuttles polished nearly black by use, a brass thimble, a skein winder peg, a small pair of iron snips, and 3 carved stamps for marking cloth. One stamp bore the same simple symbol painted faintly on the shed sign, a branching indigo stem inside a circle. The next bundle held raw cotton, not useful now except as witness, packed in paper twists and labeled by hand, Sea Island Remnant. John's Island, 1941. Another held dried indigo leaves, brittle and black-green, sealed in glassine envelopes. Not for dyeing after all these years. Perhaps, but for identification. A third held seed packets wrapped in wax and nested inside a tobacco tin. The labels were written in brown ink that had faded but not vanished. Native indigo, marsh edge strain. Saved 1932. Saved 1936. Saved 1944. Do not sell to men who ask only yield. Maya touched the packets as if touching a sleeping pulse. She knew enough to understand their danger and their worth. Seeds were not money. They were more fragile than money and more demanding. They could be ruined by damp, heat, greed, haste. Aunt Thea had spoken of old indigo strains as some families spoke of lost children, with restraint because longing had to keep its manners. Many lines had vanished when fields changed, when markets shifted, when families left land under pressure, when craft became display instead of livelihood. Maya placed the tin back carefully and opened the cedar box. Inside lay folded cloth samples tied by shade, pale sky, rain blue, river dusk, storm edge, almost black. Each strip was labeled with date, leaf ratio, vat age, and number of dips. The handwriting was not Aunt Thea's. It was older, narrower, made by a hand trained to save space. Beside the samples was a small notebook wrapped in brown paper, but when Maya lifted it, a sealed letter slid out from beneath the cover and fell against her knee. The envelope was addressed in the same narrow hand. "To the one who finds this after us." Maya stopped. The room seemed to lean toward the letter. The paper had browned at the edges, but the seal held, a dark drop of wax impressed with the indigo stem mark. She did not open it. Not then. There are thresholds a person knows before being told. The day had already asked too much of her hands. She set the letter on the work table, face up, and covered it with a clean piece of muslin. Only after that did she open the tin trunk. The brass hasp had no lock, only a bent cotter pin threaded through to keep it closed. Inside were rolls wrapped in newspaper, cloth sacks, and a flat velvet-lined case cracked along one hinge. She took out the rolls one at a time and unfolded the newspaper with care. The dates on the paper were from 1951, though some bills inside were older. Currency lay in bundles tied with cotton thread, each bundle marked in pencil. She counted because not counting would make the thing less real and more frightening. There were $20 bills with small portraits and soft corners, $10 silver certificates, blue seals faded but clear, $5 notes folded in groups of 10, $2 bills kept flat between cardboard, a stack of $1 silver certificates that smelled of paper, dust, and human hands. In the cloth sacks were coins, Morgan silver dollars, peace dollars, Walking Liberty half-dollars, Mercury dimes, buffalo nickels with dates worn faint, Indian head cents, wheat pennies, and one small roll of silver quarters marked laundry money in pencil. She counted on the floor with charcoal marks on a board. First by kind, then by value, then again because her hands had begun to tremble and she did not trust the first sum. The bills came to $31,470. The silver dollars and half-dollars brought it above $35,000. The smaller coins finished the arithmetic slowly, in stacks and rows and careful recounting. The total was $36,000.72. Maya wrote it once on the back of the account paper from Mr. Bellamy's store. Then she crossed it out because seeing the number beside potatoes and chimney brush made her feel unsteady. She wrote it again on a clean scrap from the booklet and folded it into the tin trunk. At the bottom, beneath the last cloth sack, lay the metal case. The velvet inside had gone flat with age, but the metal still held its shape and weight. It was a purple heart. The ribbon faded. The metal darkened along the edges. Beside it was a paper slip no wider than 2 fingers. Privetted. Samuel Rivers. Killed in service. Korea, 1951. Maya held the case in both hands. She knew the war only from school pages and Veterans Day assemblies where names were read too quickly under gym lights. Here, in the workroom, the name did not belong to a chapter. It belonged to the same hands that had wrapped money, saved seeds, sealed cloth, and built a secret beneath a dye vat because danger had once come close enough to require hiding. She closed the case and placed it on the muslin beside the unopened letter. The afternoon waned without asking permission. Light shifted higher on the walls, then thinned. Maya repacked the money exactly as she had found it. Not because she meant to leave it hidden, but because disorder felt like disrespect. The seed tin she wrapped again and set inside the cedar box. The tools she laid in a row on the table, then covered them with cloth. The letter remained unopened beneath the clean muslin, its seal intact. She could have read it. The candle was there. Matches were there. The fire could be started. The letter had waited longer than she had been alive, and still she turned away from it as evening gathered. Not yet. She carried the metal case to the front room and set it on the hearth. Then she carried it back to the work table because the hearth felt too exposed. Then, after another minute, she placed it beside the letter, where the two quiet things seemed to belong to one another. The hidden compartment remained open until she was certain of how everything had been arranged. She lowered the hinged floorboards back into place and turned the cedar disc with the iron pin until the latch caught beneath. The seam vanished into ordinary shadow. The danger area looked again like nothing but stained floor near a failing vat. That frightened her more than the opening had. A person could walk over a life and never hear it below. At dusk, Maya went outside through the rear door. She did not take the flashlight. The world beyond the shed held enough gray light for standing still. The marsh spread before her in winter colors: pewter water, brown grass, black mud, a pale strip of sky reflected in channels that wandered between reeds. Far off, an egret lifted and lowered its wings, white against the dimming water. The air smelled of salt, leaf rot, and smoke from a house she could not see. She walked to the edge where the ground softened and stopped before her shoes could sink. Her hands hung at her sides, empty for once. Behind her, beneath the floor, lay money enough to change every immediate fact of her life if spent without care. Seeds enough to make demands on seasons she had not planned to survive. A medal with a name. A letter waiting with an address that was not a name but a summons. She did not cry. Her face remained still. One hand moved to the coat pocket where the account card from Dale Hardware had been folded. She pressed it flat against her thigh, then let go. The tide was going out. Water drew back from the grass with small, patient sounds, uncovering dark mud that had been there all along. Maya stayed until the cold reached through her shoes and made her toes ache. Then she returned to the shed, shut the door as well as it could be shut, and sat in the front room without lighting a candle. The unopened letter waited in the back room under muslin. She waited in the dark before it, listening to the marsh, the roof, the floor, and the held silence beneath the vat. The shed had been waiting, and so had she. Morning came through the broken window in a color almost blue, as if the night had left a thin stain on the glass. Maya rose before the birds were fully awake. Her joints ached from the boards, and one shoulder had gone stiff from sleeping too near the wall, but she moved with a care that made every object in the room seem newly placed. The saucepan, the folded deed, the gloves drying beside the hearth, the account card, Mrs.
Baptiste's flashlight,
the dented tin cup she had washed 3 times and still did not quite trust. She boiled water first. That had become the beginning of order. While the pan trembled over the low flame, she washed her hands with the lye soap until the skin over her knuckles tightened. She dried them on the blue-striped dish towel, then stood a moment looking toward the rear room. The letter was where she had left it, beneath muslin on the work table. She did not hurry. She cleared a place near the front window because the light was better there. She set the metal case beside the table, not touching the ribbon. She brought the cedar box and the small notebook, then returned for the envelope, carrying it flat on both palms. The handwriting seemed less strange by daylight. Narrow, steady, slightly right-leaning, with long descenders and a small lift at the end of each capital R. It had the same discipline as the older labels on the cloth samples, and for a passing second Maya saw Aunt Thea's hand over another woman's hand, generation laid over generation, not identical but answering. She broke the wax seal with the edge of the bone folder. The paper opened along folds that had been waiting longer than many houses stand. It gave off a dry scent of cedar, starch, and time held carefully away from damp. Maya smoothed it once, only once, then began to read. My dear one, whoever you are, if this letter has come into your hands, then the floor has remembered what the living forgot to say. I do not know your name, and I will not pretend the dead are granted knowledge they did not earn while breathing. I know only that you have found the vat, the cedar turn, and the place beneath it where I put what could not be safely kept in a bank, a bureau, or a mouth. I am writing from Beaufort, in the last week of October 1954, after Dr. Henry Whitcomb at Roper Hospital in Charleston told me the growth in my chest has gone where a knife cannot follow. He was careful with his words, and I was careful with my face. I thanked him, took the train home, cooked rice for my husband's brother, and began sorting what would be left after me. A person becomes exact when time narrows. She learns which objects are merely possessions and which are vessels. My name is Ruth Eliza Rivers Freeman. I was born in 1896 on St. Helena Island, daughter of Naomi Rivers, who was born in 1868 near the old Penn School Road, and granddaughter of Adeline Rivers, who was born enslaved in 1841 on a plantation near the Coosaw River and lived to see her first land tax receipt folded into her own Bible. Adeline's mother was called Suki in the white man's ledger, though among her own people she carried the name Sula, said to have come down from women who knew Indigo before they were forced across water. That is as far back as paper lets me go, but paper is not the whole of knowing. My father's people came through cotton and boat work. My mother's people came through seed, dye, and cloth. The first vat in our line was not this one. It was a pit lined with cypress and clay behind a cabin that no longer stands. My great-grandmother kept leaves fermenting in summer heat while soldiers moved through the county, and men argued over freedoms they had never asked the women to define. After the war, Adeline carried seed in a tobacco pouch tied beneath her skirt when she walked from the river place to St. Helena. She planted it beside okra because okra kept gossip away. Folks looked at what filled the pot and missed what colored the cloth. Naomi improved the vat. My mother learned the old temperature by wrist and elbow, though I set numbers down because memory weakens when no one is made to practice it. In warm weather, steep the fresh leaves at 90 to 100 degrees. No hotter. Weighted below water for 12 to 18 hours, depending on the strength of the leaf and the mood of the air. When the liquor turns copper green and smells sharp but not rotten, draw it off and beat air into it until the blue begins to gather. Settle the pigment. Save the paste. For a working vat, use clean rainwater if you can. 1 part indigo paste to enough lye water to wake it, and bran or molasses to feed it when it tires. Keep it near blood warm, never boiling. A vat is alive but not a beast. It must be tended, not conquered. For cotton cloth, scour first. Do not trust fabric that carries mill grease or the hands of stores. For every pound of cotton, use 2 ounces washing soda and water hot enough to steam but not rage, and rinse until the water runs honest. Dip slow. Do not splash. Hold under 3 minutes for pale blue, 5 for work blue, and 7 only when the vat is strong enough to forgive you. Lift green. Let air do its work. 10 minutes between dips at least. 6 dips will give a blue that can face Sunday. 9 dips will give a blue that remembers night. Do not wring too hard after the last rinse. Cloth has a dignity that rough hands can take from it. The trade closed here not in one day, but there was a date when I understood it had closed. September 18, 1927. That was the day, mister. Callow from Charleston came with 2 men and a ledger and told us synthetic dye from factories had made our color too slow. Too dear, too unreliable. He said women wanted uniform shade now. He said merchants wanted bolts that matched from end to end. He said nobody would wait for weather. Leaf, vat, hand, and breath. My mother served him coffee in a cup with no crack in it and let him finish. After he left, she went behind the shed and poured the day's rinse water into the marsh without a sound. We still died for families. Churches, burials, births, and women who came with cloth hidden in flour sacks because they did not want store blue for a child's quilt. But the trade was no longer a living. It became a kept thing. Kept things are always in danger. People call them hobbies, then curiosities, then junk. They sell the loom for firewood and the seed for bird feed. They laugh at instructions because they have never needed the thing instructed. For more than 30 years, I watched silence take one item at a time. My husband, Elias Freeman, worked the boats until his lungs filled badly in winter. My brother Joseph went to France in the Great War and returned with one ear that could hear thunder before rain but little else. My son Samuel went to Korea and did not come back. His purple heart is with this letter because I could not bear to put it in a drawer where a stranger might buy it by the ounce. He was 21. He could mend a shuttle, sing bass, and make a child stop crying by clicking his tongue like a marsh hen. Say his name once when you can. After Samuel died in 1951, people told me to sell this place. They meant kindness, some of them. Others meant opportunity. A man offered cash for the cypress vat because he wanted it for a restaurant display. A museum lady wanted 3 cloth samples and none of the trouble. A seed agent asked what varieties I had left and smiled too much when he said preservation. I began hiding what mattered. Not from thieves only, but from carelessness, which is the more common thief. The money is not a fortune, though it may look like one to hungry eyes. It came from cloth, boat wages, church work, saved coins, a death benefit, and years of refusing unnecessary things. Use it slowly. Repair before comfort. Buy tools before curtains. Pay debts that kept you alive. Keep enough sealed for the person after you, because inheritance is not what we receive. It is what we refuse to spend all the way down. The seeds are more important than the money. Do not plant them all. Test a few with a patient gardener or a county agent who understands old lines and does not talk too fast. Save the strongest. Write dates. Write weather. Write failures in the same hand as successes. A lost crop can teach if pride does not burn the notes. If you came here by blood, I welcome you. If you came here by accident, I welcome you also. Blood is one river, but care is another, and sometimes care reaches farther. Do not let any person make you prove grief before allowing you to belong. If you are standing in this shed with blue dust under your nails, cold boards under your feet, and no witness but the marsh, then you are already kin to what was kept. I have no command to give you. Commands are for people who think they will be present to enforce them. I have only a request. Learn one thing well enough that your hands can teach it when your mouth is tired. Feed the vat if you choose to wake it. Mend the roof before spring rain. Do not sell the stones with blue thread. The 4th holds the pin, as you have learned by now, and the 7th was wrapped by my grandmother on the day she paid her first tax in her own name. Behind the shed, 27 steps from the back sill toward the walnut tree, there is a horseshoe grown into the bark at shoulder height. Beneath that tree, Samuel buried the first shuttle he ever broke. He said broken tools deserved a place if they had served honestly. I let him, though Aaliyah said boys could turn anything into a ceremony. I am tired now. The lamp is low, and my hand is not what it was. If you find this after I am gone, do not imagine this place abandoned. It has held breath, work, sorrow, laughter, rice steam, wet cotton, storm water, and the hands of women who had little time to be remembered by the world. That is not emptiness. That is keeping. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Ruth Eliza Rivers, October 29, 1954. Maya reached the signature and did not move. The page lay beneath her hands, its fibers lifting slightly along the old creases. Outside, a bird gave one note and then withdrew it into mourning. The fire behind her had thinned to a low red bed, and the saucepan lid clicked once as the last heat left the metal. She read the signature again, not because she had missed it, but because names sometimes have to be entered slowly, like cold water. Then she began at the top and read the whole letter a second time. This time she paused at the instructions. She traced the numbers without touching the ink. 90 to 100 degrees. 12 to 18 hours. 3 minutes. 5. 7. 10 minutes between dips. She folded each measurement into memory the way Aunt Thea had once folded cotton before dyeing. Corner to corner, edge to edge, patient enough to let the cloth become obedient without being broken. When she finished, she refolded the paper along its original creases. Not sharper, not looser, exactly where Ruth's hands had once folded it. She placed it back into the envelope without resealing it, then laid the envelope beside the metal case and the seed tin. For a little while, all the room required of her was stillness. Then she stood, took the letter in one hand and Mrs. Baptiste flashlight in the other, and went out the back door. The ground behind the shed was wet enough to hold every step. She counted aloud, very softly, because numbers needed breath to become real. 1, 2, 3. The marsh opened to her left. The walnut tree stood ahead, bare-limbed and wide at the trunk, its bark furrowed deeply as an elder's hand. Winter had stripped it of leaves, and without them its shape looked almost human in the gray light. One arm reaching toward the shed, one toward the water. At 27 steps, Maya stopped. The horseshoe was there. It had not been nailed to the surface as decoration. The tree had grown around it over many years, swallowing the iron at both ends and leaving only the curved middle visible. Dark and rough, set into living wood at the height of Maya's shoulder. Moss had gathered in the lower bend. A spider had made a fine empty web between iron and bark. She brushed neither away. Beneath her feet, under soil and root, lay the broken shuttle of a boy who had died in a war she had only known from pages. Maya stood with the letter held against her coat and imagined a child's ceremony performed with grave attention while adults watched from the shed doorway and pretended not to be moved. She could almost see his hand pressing dirt over the tool, not burying failure, but honoring service. She did not dig. Some things asked to remain below. Back inside, she searched the cedar box until she found the candle. It had been wrapped in brown wax paper, tied with thread, and laid beside the cloth samples. At first she thought it too brittle to use. The beeswax had darkened from honey to amber, and one side had flattened where it rested for decades. A paper label around it read Christmas Work Candle, 1949. Save for storm. She set it in a chipped saucer on the front room table. The wick was stiff and dusty. She trimmed it with the iron snips, cupped a match against the draft, and touched fire to the old thread. The candle resisted. The wick glowed, smoked, and nearly died. Then it accepted the flame. Small light rose from 1949 into the cold shed. It was not bright. It did not conquer the corners or soften the roof holes or mend the cracked glass. It made only a modest circle across the table. Touching the letter, the metal case, the bone folder, and Maya's hands. But the quality of that light changed the room. It brought every object closer to its own name. Wood became grain. Dust became witness. The blue-stained peg became not refuse but tool. The dish towel became woven labor. The deed became less like paper and more like responsibility. Maya sat before it until the wax softened at the rim. She began to think of the people who had carried her here without knowing they were carrying her. The woman at the gas station who had given her the stronger tote. The church van driver with the clouded eye who had placed a biscuit between them and called no attention to mercy. The librarian with the oatmeal cardigan who had told her which office to visit and where the cold water ran. Mrs. Baptiste, who had pressed the brass stamp and loaned the flashlight as if trust could be checked out like a book. Jonah Bellamy, who had written potatoes onto a debt card rather than call them charity. Their kindness had not been large enough to solve a life. Perhaps that was why it had entered so deeply. It had not arrived with speeches or instructions, had not demanded gratitude as payment, had not stood over her waiting to be praised. It had simply made the next hour possible. Then the next. Then the next. And maybe, if you are listening tonight from your own room, with the day finally quiet around you, you know the kind of kindness I mean. Not the grand rescue people retell at tables, but the smaller thing that kept you from falling farther than you did. A ride given in rain. A bill paid without a name attached. A sandwich placed in your hand when pride would not let you ask. A teacher who kept the classroom door open 10 extra minutes. A neighbor who shoveled your walk after the winter you could not lift the shovel. If someone once did that for you, even if years have covered it, perhaps you still remember the exact sound of their voice, the color of their coat, the ordinary cup, the ordinary door, the ordinary hand that became, for 1 hour, a bridge. Maya had no way to repay most of them. She did not know the gas station woman's name. She had not asked the van drivers. The librarian might not remember her by the next week. Kindness often moves without leaving an address. So she did the only exact thing available. She tore a clean strip from the edge of an unusable cotton sack and wrote their names where she knew them, and descriptions where she did not. Gas station tote woman. Church van biscuit man. Library water lady. Mrs. Baptiste. Mr. Bellamy. She folded the strip and placed it in the cedar box beside the cloth samples, not as history yet, but as a beginning ledger of debts that had no due date. That evening, she made a thin supper of the last potato and boiled water. She ate beside the candle, slowly, and afterward cleaned the saucepan with sand, a rag, and care. The sky darkened over the marsh. The shed settled into its familiar sounds, but they no longer seemed random to her. The roof ticks, the wall sighs, the water beyond the grass, the faint dry shift of the hidden floorboards as temperature changed, each belonged to the same held place. Before sleeping, she moved the heirlooms to the front room. Not the money. That she sealed again beneath the vat, because the letter had named patience and she meant to obey at least one instruction before pride found her. But the letter, the metal, the seed tin, the blue-threaded stones, and the bone folder she wrapped in muslin and set beside her pallet near the hearth. She placed the candle saucer on the floor where she could see the flame from where she lay, though she pinched it out before sleep to save what remained. Darkness returned, but it was not the same darkness. Maya lay on the boards with the muslin bundle beside her shoulder and one hand resting lightly over it. The cold came up as it always did. The roof let in a thin draft. Somewhere near the wall, a mouse resumed its careful work. But beneath these sounds was another presence now, not comforting in the easy way, not soft, but steady. She had entered the shed with almost nothing that could be proven. She slept beside what had been kept. On December 3rd, the first snow came before daylight, 3 inches of it settling over the marsh grass with a gentleness that made every broken thing appear briefly forgiven. Maya woke to a room brighter than it should have been. The leaks had gone silent in the night, not because the roof had mended itself, but because cold had taken the rain and laid it down whole. Snow rested on the broken window sash, on the front step, on the warped lid of the great vat, and along the sill where a line of mouse tracks crossed once, hesitated, and disappeared into the wall. Outside, the marsh had turned spare and pale, each reed carrying a white edge, each channel dark as ink. She did not go out at once. She sat near the hearth with the county repair booklet open across her knees and read the roof chapter for the 3rd time. The first reading had frightened her. The second had confused her. The third began to give names to tasks that had seemed too large to stand beside. Roof pitch, decking, underlayment, flashing, drip edge, lap, exposure, ridge cap, sister rafter, chalk line, nail pattern. Words did not repair anything by themselves, but they made the work less like weather and more like a series of patient motions. By then she had returned Mrs. Baptista's flashlight, wrapped in paper and carried in both hands to the courthouse counter. The clerk had accepted it without ceremony and placed it in the drawer from which it had come. No speech, only a nod. That was enough. The roof needed more than the remaining money could buy outright, so Maya took Ruth's instruction as law. Repair before comfort. Pay debts that kept you alive. Use slowly. From the hidden cash she took 3 silver quarters and 1 $5 note, 2 worn at the fold, to lie flat. She did not take more. She wrote the date, the amount, and the purpose on a scrap of paper and sealed the note inside the tin trunk afterward, as if the accounting mattered to the unseen as much as to her. At Dale Hardware, Mr. Bellamy stood behind the counter with a pencil tucked behind one ear and a coffee mug near his left hand. He listened while she gave the roof measurements she had taken from the ground with string, steps, and the booklet's plain arithmetic. The building was 24 by 32 feet, with a low gable roof, about 7/12 pitch according to the diagram she had copied. There were 2 bad seams, 1 soft section above the hearth, 3 missing fasteners along the east slope, and a ridge cap that had lifted enough for wind-driven rain to enter. "You need shingles," he said. "I thought tin. You need a dry roof you can put on without dying. That tin is past arguing. We will lay felt and architectural shingles over sound decking where it is sound. Patch the bad boards, flash the chimney, and keep the pitch honest." He wrote figures on brown wrapping paper. 7 squares of shingles with waste, 2 rolls of 15-pound felt, 1 bundle starter strip, 1 bundle ridge cap, 5 pounds of 1 1/4 inch galvanized roofing nails, 2 lengths aluminum drip edge, 1 tube roofing cement, 3 sheets 1/2 inch exterior plywood for the soft section, a chalk line, a utility knife, a flat bar. The total made Maya's throat tighten. Mr. Bellamy crossed out 2 lines, changed 1 price, and marked several items used to count. "You cannot carry them." "No, sir." Earl Voss can haul it Thursday if his truck starts. I can pay. You can pay when the roof keeps rain off your head. From beneath the counter, he took a roofing hatchet with a leather-wrapped handle darkened by use. One side carried a hammer face, the other a short blade and gauge. The head had been cleaned but not polished. A name had been burned into the handle so faintly that Maya had to turn it toward the window to read it. J. Freeman. My uncle got that from a Rivers man after Hurricane Gracie tore half the county open, mister. Bellamy said. He kept it because good tools prefer being kept. You bring it back when you are done, unless it tells you otherwise. Maya held it by the handle, feeling the weight settle toward her wrist. I don't know how to use it yet. Then you will learn before you swing. Earl Voss's truck did start on Thursday, though it smoked blue all the way down the marsh road and complained at every rut. With him came the elder Mr. Bellamy had mentioned a former roofer named Amos Crittenden, who arrived wearing a wool cap pulled low, a canvas coat patched with sailcloth, and boots so old they seemed shaped by ladder rungs. He was 74, maybe more. His face was narrow and deeply lined, his eyes clear, his speech reduced by choice to what the work required. He looked at the shed from the road, then at the roof, then at Maya. You scared of heights? Yes. Sir. He refused payment before she offered it. When she tried anyway, he shook his head once. Your people patched my mother's burial cloth. Blue border. No charge. That was all. For 11 days, the roof ruled every hour with light in it. They began by clearing snow with a broom tied to a pole. Amos did not allow Maya on the roof the first morning. He made her watch from the ladder while he tested the decking with the roofing hatchet handle, striking lightly and listening. Solid wood answered tight. Soft wood answered dull. Rotten wood did not answer at all. Sound tells truth, he said. By noon he had marked the bad section with chalk. By evening they had pried off lifted tin and exposed boards beneath. Some gray and hard, some blackened with old damp. Maya learned to pull nails without tearing more wood than necessary. She learned to set a flat bar under the head, rock once, lift, and save any board that had not surrendered. She learned that care was slower than force but wasted less. On the second day they cut out the soft roof deck above the hearth. Amos showed her how to sister a weakened rafter, placing a new 2x6 alongside the old one, clamping it tight, then fastening with staggered 3-inch screws so the load shared instead of shifted. He made her drill pilot holes because aged pine could split like a dry biscuit. Again, he said when the first screw angled. She backed it out and did it again. The chalk line became her favorite tool by the 4th day. Amos let her hook it at the eave, stretch it clean to his mark, lift the blue string, and snap. A straight line appeared across felt, bright and exact. Shingles followed that line, course by course. Each one lapped so water would be guided downward instead of invited inward. She learned exposure, learned to set the nail above the cutout but below the seal strip, learned the rhythm Amos called the 3-stroke nail. Tap to set, strike to seat, touch to listen. That nail's proud. She pulled it. Again. She did it again. Cold worked into her fingers even through gloves. The roof grit wore a raw place at one knee. At night, her shoulders trembled when she lifted the saucepan. Still, each morning she climbed the ladder with more certainty in her feet. Fear remained, but it became useful. It made her place each step deliberately. It kept her low when wind came off the marsh. It reminded her not to lean past her center. They flashed the chimney on the 9th day. Amos cut the metal with snips and showed her step flashing, counter flashing, the patient tucking of edges into mortar joints that would later need proper repair. Roofing cement sealed only what metal could not. He disliked overuse. Tar is not skill. On December 14th, under a sky white with coming weather, they set the last ridge cap. Amos tapped the final nail flush and handed the hatchet back to Maya. She listened. For the first time since she had entered the shed, wind crossed the roof without finding a loose seam to lift. No ticking tin. No hollow flap. Only the broad, settled hush of a covered building. That evening, rain came cold and steady. Maya placed every pan she owned in its usual place, then sat beside the hearth and waited. The roof darkened. The room held. The table stayed dry. The floor by the door stayed dry. The place near her pallet where water had once fallen in a slow midnight rhythm stayed dry. She did not cheer. She rose, carried the empty pans back to the shelf, and folded the blue-striped towel beside the hearth. January entered through the chimney before the calendar reached it. The roof no longer leaked, so the building began revealing older injuries. Without rain claiming all attention, Maya could see how the chimney had suffered. Lower bricks near the firebox had spalled until their faces powdered beneath her thumb. Mortar joints had receded in pale grooves. One corner of the hearth support had loosened enough that ash collected behind it. When she brushed the brick, red dust fell like dry blood onto the stone. She took the booklet to Mr. Bellamy, along with 3 copied measurements and a drawing of the chimney face. He studied the page while standing near the stove, one hand at his chin. "Do not use Portland cement on that," he said. "The booklet says the wrong mortar can break the right brick. Old brick needs lime. Breathes with it. Moves with it. Portland is too hard. Traps water. Then freeze breaks the face clean off." He pulled items from shelves and named each. Hydraulic lime, 1 small bag. Washed sand, screened fine. Fire clay for the inner firebox. A margin of refractory mortar for the hottest joint, but only where needed. A pointing trowel, used. A joint rake, made from an old file. A stiff brush. A spray bottle. "For outer joints," he said. Writing on wrapping paper, 1 part hydraulic lime to 2½ parts sand. Damp, not soupy. For firebox patches, 1 part fire clay, 1 part lime, 2 parts sharp sand. Pack firm. Keep it damp while it cures. Slow is strength. Maya wrote it down exactly. For 3 weeks, she worked in temperatures that stayed in the 20s before noon and sometimes never rose far above freezing. She built only small fires and let them die before repair. Heat too soon could ruin fresh mortar. Cold too deep could do the same. The chimney demanded timing, and timing was another form of respect. She began by raking out failed joints to twice their width where possible, never deeper than sound mortar allowed. The tool scraped with a gritty, tooth-wearing sound. She brushed dust from each groove, then misted the brick until the water darkened it but did not run. Dry brick would steal moisture from new mortar. Mr. Bellamy had warned her of that twice. "Brick drinks," he said. "Make it sip first." She mixed mortar in the dented saucepan's ruined cousin, a shallow pan borrowed from the store. Lime dust lifted into the air and settled on her sleeves. She wore the damp rag over her mouth and learned the difference between too wet, too dry, and workable by how the mortar clung to the trowel when turned sideways. The first batch slumped. She scraped it out and began again. The second crumbled before she could tool the joint. She covered it with damp cloth, waited, and learned. Bare hands gave better judgment than gloves, but the cold punished that knowledge. Every 15 minutes her fingers went numb, starting at the tips and moving inward until the trowel felt distant. She would stop, tuck both hands beneath her arms, and walk small circles in the front room until pain returned in hot needles. Then she went back to the brick. Day after day, the chimney face changed by inches. Rake, brush, mist, pack, press, strike, tool the joint slightly recessed so water would not sit proud, cover with damp burlap. Wait. She spoke little, even to herself. The work did not like being accompanied by too many words. At night she read Ruth's craft instructions by candlelight, not because she was ready to wake the vat, but because the letter had become another manual. Keep near blood warm. Do not splash. Let air do its work. Those sentences belonged to dye, yet they seemed to cross the room and settle over mortar. Roof, body, and hunger. Everything living or handmade required conditions. Too much force, and it failed. Too much neglect, and it failed. Attention was not tenderness only. It was discipline. The firebox took the longest. Old soot had hidden damage in the back wall, where heat had opened hairline cracks through 2 bricks. Mr. Bellamy came once to inspect, bringing no ceremony with him, only a paper bag of stove bolts for another customer and a flashlight with a stronger beam. He crouched before the hearth, ran one finger along the repaired joint, and grunted. Not pretty. No, sir. Good. Pretty lies early. He showed her how to pack fireclay mortar deeper with a narrow wood stick, then smooth the face without polishing it. Fire wants grip. By the last week of January, the chimney stood sound enough for a test fire. Maya waited 2 extra days because the air had gone wet and freezing, and patience cost less than cracked mortar. On January 28th, the sky cleared hard and blue. She opened the front door, laid kindling in a small crisscross, placed 1 split log no thicker than her wrist, and lit paper at the base. Smoke rose. It touched the throat, gathered, and pulled cleanly upward. She went outside at once and looked at the chimney. A thin gray ribbon moved from the top, straight for several feet before the wind took it. No smoke leaked from the joints. No dark breath seeped along the brick face. Back inside, the fire held without coughing into the room. Maya sat on the floor and warmed her hands at a distance, careful not to overheat the new work. The chimney had not become beautiful. It had become trustworthy. That was better. The floor had waited under everything. Roof first, because water ruins all arguments. Chimney second, because heat without safety becomes danger. Only then did Maya allow herself to address the boards beneath her feet, the long white pine planks that had carried work. Neglect, county boots, animal tracks, and her own first uncertain steps. Some were beyond saving, especially near the wastewater channel and the rear threshold. But most, once cleaned of dirt and old salts, showed tight grain and the marks of hand planing beneath grime. The nails were rosehead, hand-cut, irregular in a way no machine would trouble to imitate. Their heads sat slightly off-center. Their shafts had blackened but still held. Mr. Bellamy told her to save every one she pulled. You cannot buy those at a price that makes sense. She worked board by board. First she numbered planks with pencil in places that would later be hidden. Then she lifted only those that had to rise, using the flat bar and shim so the tongues would not split. Beneath them she found dry mouse nests, oyster shell fragments, sand, and one child's glass marble the color of watered milk. She set the marble on the mantel without deciding why. For replacement boards, Amos Crittenden sent word to Mr. Bellamy that a cousin had white pine planks in a barn loft, milled 30 years before and never used because the project they belonged to had outlived the marriage that planned it. Maya paid a fair price for 5 boards and wrote the amount down. They arrived rough and pale, smelling of resin when cut. She learned to fit them by scribing rather than guessing. Old rooms were not square because time had no interest in right angles. She laid each plank in place, marked the high spots, shaved a little with a borrowed block plane, set it again, removed it, shaved again. When the seam finally closed without force, she fastened it with salvaged rosehead nails where possible, drilling tiny pilot holes so the pine would not split. Each nail took attention. Tap. Listen. Set. Do not bruise the surface. The sanding machine frightened her more than the roof ladder. Dale Hardware rented a random orbit sander for $14 a day, with a deposit, Mr. Bellamy did not mention after Maya looked at him. It was heavy, round, and loud in a way that filled the body. He sent 3 packets of discs, 80 grit, 120, 220. He made her repeat the order of use before he let her carry it out. 80 cuts. 120 tells the truth. 220 makes it kind to the hand. She began in the front room at sunrise, wearing the rag over her mouth and cotton stuffed lightly in her ears. The first pass lifted years of gray from the wood. Dust rose despite the bag, coating her sleeves, hair, and eyelashes. The machine tugged if she pressed too hard, so she learned to guide rather than command it. Along the edges, she sanded by hand with a scrap block, fingers following grain where the machine could not go. The floor changed under the work. Not quickly. The first pass revealed scars, stains, nail shadows, and old watermarks. The second softened the roughness but did not erase history. The third brought a surface that accepted light. She vacuumed with a borrowed hand sweeper that barely worked, swept twice, wiped with damp cloth, and waited for the dust to settle before oiling. For finish, Mr. Bellamy recommended tongue oil cut with a little citrus solvent for the first coat, then a second coat richer, then a third thin coat of boiled linseed oil only where the wood asked for it. 48 hours cure between coats if the weather stayed dry. No shortcuts. No rugs. No heavy furniture. No walking in dirty shoes. The first coat sank into the pine until the boards seemed to drink from below. Pale wood darkened to honey. The older planks, which had held smoke, indigo dust, and years of bare feet, turned deeper, almost mahogany in long ribbons near the hearth. Grain rose like memory surfacing through water. Maya rubbed oil by hand with folded cloth, working it into seams, around nail heads, along thresholds where boards had been worn by people carrying wet cloth from vat to rack. By the third coat, the room held a soft sheen, not glossy, not proud, honest. Then came the bad morning. It was late January, though the light had a February thinness. Maya woke before dawn and could not make her body rise. Not from sickness exactly. Not from laziness. The weeks of cold, carrying, scraping, lifting, counting, and deciding had gathered in her bones without asking permission. Her hands were swollen. One knee throbbed from roof work. Her back tightened when she drew a breath. The floor waited for buffing. The chimney needed ash cleared. The account card needed arithmetic. The letter waited, too, in its envelope, patient and severe. Maya sat up, put on her coat, and walked out without picking up a tool. She went to the marsh edge and sat on a cypress knee above the mud, letting cold enter through the wool of her skirt and the worn seat of her jeans beneath. The morning opened slowly. Mist lifted from the water in low strips. Fiddler crabs made small doorways in the mud. Somewhere across the channel, a great blue heron stood with one leg drawn up, still enough to seem carved from the color of weather. For a long time, neither of them moved. When the heron finally stepped, it did so with such deliberate grace that the whole marsh seemed to wait for the foot to settle. One step. Stillness. Another. Its neck folded and unfolded with the patience of a creature that did not confuse waiting with defeat. Maya watched until the sun thinned the mist and the heron lifted away. Wings broad, slow, nearly silent. She did no work that day. She went back inside near afternoon, drank boiled water, ate a piece of potato fried against the pan with almost no fat, and sat on the finished portion of floor with her palms resting on the boards. No apology was spoken. No vow was made. The house did not ask for one. The shed had been waiting, and so had she. February began with wind. It came off the marsh with a flat, cold persistence, finding every opening the roof and chimney had not addressed. The 8 windows became the next necessity. 3 held no glass at all, only empty sash and hardened teeth of putty. 4 were cracked, one with a line running corner to corner like lightning trapped in old pane. The last, on the north wall of the workroom, still held original wavy glass, so thin and alive with distortion that the marsh beyond it seemed to breathe when seen through. Someone had penciled a date on the upper sash long ago. 1788. Whether the sash had come from an older building or the shed had borrowed history from another structure, Maya did not know. She only knew she would not replace it. Mr. Bellamy approved that decision with one nod. You save old glass when it is saving you. The window work required gentler hands than roofing or floors. He sold her glazier's points, a small diamond point tool, 2 salvaged panes, and a partial can of DAP 33 glazing putty with a skin on top that could be peeled away to reach the usable compound beneath. He cut 3 panes from old storm windows in the back room of the store, measuring twice, scoring once, and snapping each piece over the counter edge with a sound like ice deciding. Leave 1/8 inch, he said. Glass needs room same as people. Back at the shed, Maya removed each sash slowly. The cords in most had rotted into brown threads, and one weight dropped inside the pocket with a dull thud that made her close her eyes before she laughed once under her breath. Not amusement. Recognition. Even hidden weights fall when their cords are cut. She labeled each sash by wall and position. North upper. North lower. East 1. East 2. Front left. Front right. Workroom south. Vat window. The original pane she wrapped in cloth and leaned against the table while she repaired its frame first. Old putty came away in chips where it had dried to stone, and in stubborn rubbery strips where damp had preserved it oddly. She used the putty knife at a low angle, careful not to scar the wood. Along cracked panes she taped both sides before removal so broken glass would not scatter. Each empty rabbet was brushed clean, then primed with a thin coat of oil so the wood would not draw life from the putty too quickly. The DAP 33 felt strange at first, stiff and cold. She warmed small amounts between her palms, rolling it into snakes the width of a pencil. A bedding layer first. Glass pressed gently into it. Glazier's point set with the edge of the tool, 2 on each side for small panes, more where the sash was wide. Then the face putty, pressed into the angle between glass and wood, drawn smooth with the knife in one long motion. Her first line was lumpy. She scraped it away and began again. By the third window, her hand found the angle. 45 degrees, more or less. Firm pressure. Clean corner. Do not fuss until the line dies from handling. Mr. Bellamy had said putty disliked nervousness. And he was right. A clean draw left an honest bevel that would shed rain when painted. A worried draw left ridges where water could sit and work mischief. The sash cords were 1/4-inch cotton, braided and plain. Mr. Bellamy showed her how to feed each cord over the pulley, tie it to the iron counterweight with a figure-8 knot, and test the weight before closing the pocket. Too short, and the window would not open fully. Too long, and the weight would strike bottom before the sash lifted. Maya measured by old marks where she could, by touch where she could not. The figure-8 knot pleased her. It held without vanity. It could be inspected. It did not become larger than its purpose. For 5 days she lived among windows. The front room filled with sash, cloth, putty, points, broken glass wrapped in newspaper, and lengths of cord like pale snakes on the floor. Wind came in cruelly while openings stood empty, so she worked one window at a time, boarding each gap at night with salvaged planks and feed sacks nailed along the edges. Her fingers smelled of linseed, putty, and old dust. Fine cuts appeared on her knuckles despite gloves. She learned to turn her face away when glass snapped. The original window took an entire day. She cleaned its pane with vinegar water and a cloth soft from wear, never scraping hard. The glass held bubbles no larger than seeds and faint waves that bent the view of the walnut tree outside. Around the edge, the old putty had failed, but the glass itself remained whole. She bedded it again as if laying down a sleeping child, set points with a tenderness that slowed her breathing, and drew the putty line in 4 careful passes. When the sash returned to its frame and the cotton cord lifted the counterweight smoothly, Maya stood back and opened the window 2 inches. It rose without complaint. Cold air entered, but now it entered by invitation. The last window was the front right, facing the walnut branch nearest the shed. By then, the room had begun to hold warmth in a way it had not before. Not much. Enough. The repaired roof held dry overhead. The chimney drew clean. The floor no longer snagged every sock and shadow. Window by window, the wind had been taught manners. She set the final pane just after noon on a clear February day. The sky beyond the glass was pale and high, and the marsh shone where the tide had turned. As she pressed the last glazier's point into place, a chickadee landed on the walnut branch outside. It was a compact bird, gray and white, with a black cap and a body round against the cold. It gripped the twig, tilted its head, and looked through the newly set pane at Maya as if inspecting the work. She held still. The bird flicked once, called 2 notes that sounded like a question it did not need answered, and remained there while she drew the final bevel of putty. The line came clean from corner to corner. No ridge. No gap. No wasted motion. When she finished, she wiped the knife, closed the putty can, and rested her hand lightly against the sash. Through the glass, the chickadee blurred and sharpened with the old wavering world beyond it. Then it lifted away into the walnut tree, leaving the branch trembling after its departure. Maya fastened the sash cord cover, gathered the broken glass bundle, and set the repaired window down into its frame for the last time. Late February brought a wet cold that made the repaired windows bead with water each morning and left the marsh smelling of roots newly exposed. With the roof sealed, the chimney drawing, the floor oiled, and the windows set, the walls began to speak more plainly. 3 failed patches near the chimney showed themselves in the changing light. The plaster there had bellied away from the hand-split oak lath beneath, cracked in patient maps, and shed pale dust whenever the door closed too firmly. In one place, the horsehair plaster still held by habit alone. When Maya pressed 2 fingers against it, the whole patch shifted behind the skin of lime wash. She did not pull it down immediately. By then she had learned that old materials deserved examination before removal. Some damaged things could be fastened again. Some only looked fragile because they had outlived generations of rougher hands. She tapped around each crack with the bone folder, listening for hollow spaces. She marked the edges with pencil. Then she cut away only what had truly failed, scoring with a utility knife, easing loose chunks from the wall, and catching them in a feed sack so the floor would not be scarred. Behind the plaster, the oak lath remained, narrow strips split by hand, nailed with tiny dark fasteners to the studs. Gaps between them held the keys of old plaster where it had squeezed through and hardened, gripping from behind. Horsehair showed in the broken edges, fine dark strands running through the lime like roots through pale soil. Maya touched one exposed strand and thought of all the bodies that had contributed quietly to houses without being named. At Dale Hardware, Mr. Bellamy took down a bag from a high shelf behind 2 boxes of stove rope. Its paper had yellowed, and the top had been folded tight with wire. "Horsehair," he said. "My father bought it in the 50s. Folks stopped asking. The bag released a dry animal smell when opened. Not unpleasant, only old and honest. Mr. Bellamy measured a modest quantity into brown paper. He added lime, fine sand, and a note written in his square hand. For scratch coat, 1 part lime putty, 2½ parts sharp sand, hair teased in until the mix holds together without clumping. Brown coat, same. Less hair, brought out to 3/8 inch. Finish coat, lime and fine sand. Thin, 1/8 inch. Smooth but not slick. Let each coat cure, he said. How long? Until it is ready. Then, seeing her face, he added, scratch coat firm by next day, but keep damp. Brown coat 72 hours before finish if the room holds above freezing. More if it does not. She wrote it down. The scratch coat was the most awkward. She misted the lath until the wood darkened, then pressed the hairlime mix into the gaps with a trowel, forcing it through so keys formed behind. She scored the surface in shallow lines before it set, giving the next coat a place to hold. The wall looked worse before it looked better. Rough and wounded, but the mix gripped. For 3 days she kept the patches damp with a spray bottle and cloth. Too fast a cure would weaken the lime. Too much heat from the hearth would make the surface lie about the center. She built small fires only at night and set a pan of water nearby so the air would not grow too dry. The shed smelled of lime, wet sand, faint smoke, and horsehair waking from storage. The brown coat went on thicker, 3/8 inch, as the note said. She used a straight board to level it with the surrounding wall, drawing upward in slow passes, shaving down high places, filling low ones, stopping before fussiness ruined the plane. After 72 hours, the patch had tightened and lightened. She could press a fingernail to it and leave no mark. The finish coat required the cleanest hand, 1/8 inch, thin enough to honor the wall beneath, thick enough to make the room whole. She worked in morning light, the trowel held at a shallow angle, the lime spreading in a pale skin over the brown coat. The edges feathered into the surrounding plaster. Not invisible. True repair rarely is. But honest. When the last patch had taken the first of the lime wash, Maya stood before the chimney wall with her sleeves rolled and a white dusting across her cheek. The room had changed in a way harder to name than a roof or window. A crack no longer drew the eye. Cold no longer slipped through gaps in the wall near the hearth. The old lath remained inside, doing its work unseen. She touched the finished plaster with the backs of her fingers. These patches will hold another 100 years. The words startled her only because they had come aloud. The first paper bag appeared on the doorstep 3 mornings later. Maya opened the door expecting wind and found the bag tucked against the jamb, folded twice at the top, weighted with a jar of something inside. There was no note. Only the smell of biscuits, still faintly warm, and a smaller twist of wax paper holding salt pork cut into careful strips. The jar held stewed tomatoes, bright red beneath a film of fat, sealed with a lid that had once belonged to peach preserves. She carried it inside and set it on the table without touching the food for several minutes. By then she had become suspicious of gifts that arrived without the giver present to answer for them. But the bag was plain. No claim. No instruction. No ribbon. At noon she walked to the roadside cafe whose steamed windows she had once passed in hunger. A bell on the door rang low when she entered. The room smelled of coffee, shrimp stock, fried cornmeal, pepper vinegar, and wet wool from coats hung on the rack. Behind the counter stood Doris Moultrie, a broad-shouldered woman in her late 50s with brown arms dusted in flour to the elbow and hair wrapped in a red scarf. She had a face that did not waste expression but was not hard. Maya placed the washed jar on the counter. Doris glanced at it, then at Maya. "Good. You return jars. I need to pay you." "I can at least, in candles when the shop reopens." Maya looked down at the counter where pie crumbs had gathered near the glass case. "It is not a shop." "Not today." Doris took the jar and set it below the counter with others. Then she filled a chipped mug with coffee and placed it near Maya without asking. "Milk?" "No." "Mom?" "No." "Mom!" Doris pushed the mug closer. "Then sit until it cools enough not to punish you." The bags continued. Never daily, never predictable enough to become dependents. A heel of bread, 2 apples with bruises cut away, a jar of beans. Once, a paper packet of tea folded inside a napkin printed with roses. Maya returned every container clean. Doris accepted them as if the exchange were business and not mercy. When Maya tried again to speak of payment, Doris pointed toward the corkboard by the cafe door, where index cards advertised yard work, church suppers, a lost hound, and 1 handwritten request for quilt repair. "You get that place open," she said. "Then we will talk." Caleb arrived after a storm. He was 16, maybe 17, all elbows, narrow shoulders, and serious eyes beneath a cap with the brim bent too sharply. He rode a red Schwinn bicycle with rust on the handlebars and a milk crate tied over the back wheel. Across the crate lay a splitting maul nearly as long as the bicycle frame. Maya heard him before she saw him. The rattle of chain over rut and the soft curse he gave when the front tire caught in sand. He leaned the bicycle against the walnut tree and stood at the edge of the yard as if approaching a door required permission from more than the living. "I am Caleb Green." Maya came down the step. "I am Maya." "I know." He looked past her toward the shed, then back to the mall. "I can split wood. I cannot pay much." "I did not ask. I need to pay something." "My mother said." "About your grandfather." Maya waited. Caleb swallowed, embarrassed by the size of whatever story had been given to him. Said he carried her daddy home after a boat accident. Said people remember. The sentence placed another hidden beam beneath the structure of her days. She did not know which grandfather he meant, or whether blood had carried the title correctly through community memory. It did not matter to Caleb. He had been sent with a maul, and the maul needed work. She showed him the fallen pine limbs, the cut pieces Earl Voss had left, and the stack she had made poorly behind the shed. Caleb set his cap on a stump, lifted the maul, and split the first round cleanly enough that the halves fell open as if relieved. He came twice a week when school and weather allowed. He did not talk while swinging. His rhythm was steady but not hurried. Set the round. Lift. Strike. Split. Stack bark up under the lean-to Amos had helped brace with 2 cedar poles and a scrap of roofing tin. He refused coffee, accepted water, and once took a biscuit only after Maya wrapped it in paper and said Doris had sent too many. At the end of the second week, Maya left $3 on the stump where his cap usually rested. Caleb found the bills, looked at them, and did not pick them up. My mother said, "That is for your bicycle tire. My tire is fine. It is showing cord." He glanced at the front wheel, then away. After a long silence, he took $1 and folded it into his pocket. Only tire. Only tire. That became their agreement. Work was offered. Needs were named only when they could not be avoided. Once, while stacking oak, Caleb stopped and looked at the faded sign above the door. "You going to—" "Not yet. Letters need saving before they disappear." The next morning, Maya found he had left a piece of brown paper under a stone, with the sign's letters traced carefully in pencil as they still remained. Rivers, Indigo, and Cotton. He had preserved what weather was taking, not by asking, but by seeing. Reverend Boyd came with no tools. He was an elderly man of compact build, with a dark felt hat, a long black coat greening at the cuffs, and a walking stick polished by the regular path of his hand. He did not introduce himself the first time. He passed the shed at 8 in the morning, walking from the direction of the church road toward the marsh cemetery beyond the bend. At the walnut tree he paused, tipped his hat toward the building, and continued. The next morning, he did the same. On the fourth morning, Maya was carrying ashes to the pit beyond the outhouse when he stopped. "Morning," he said. "Morning, sir." "You Ruth's people." Maya had learned not to answer that question too quickly. "I am trying to be." He nodded as if that were the most accurate answer available. His face held fine lines around the mouth, not from smiling much, but from holding many words back until they were needed. "I am Reverend Boyd." "Yes, sir." "I walk this road." "Yes, sir." Then I... And he did. Every morning the weather allowed, he passed at nearly the same hour. Sometimes he carried nothing. Sometimes a small Bible. Sometimes a paper sack from Doris's cafe, though he never brought it up the steps himself. If Maya was outside, he tipped his hat. If she was not, she saw his footprints later in damp sand near the walnut tree. Once, after a hard freeze, she found him standing beside the well, studying the pump. "Leather is wearing," he said. "I thought so. I have a spare cup washer." He brought it the next day wrapped in newspaper. He did not install it for her. He showed her how to unpin the handle, lift the rod, replace the leather, prime the pump, and work it until water came. His hand shook slightly, but his instruction did not. When the water ran clear, he placed his hat back on his head. "Lord, keep this roof 4 words. Then he walked on. Maya watched him until the road bent and took him behind myrtle and pine. The prayer remained after he left. Not floating, not sentimental, but lying over the roof like another course of shingles. She had postponed the cellar until February 11th because every lower place in an abandoned building asks for courage the upper rooms do not. The door was in the workroom, half hidden behind the broken draining rack and a stack of warped boards she had been avoiding. It lay flat on the floor, made of 2 thick planks cross-braced with iron straps, with a recessed ring darkened by rust. She had noticed it during the inventory and then set larger tasks in front of it, which is one way the mind keeps fear organized. By February 11th, the larger tasks had thinned. She opened the door at noon, when light was strongest, with the front and rear doors propped wide and Caleb's splitting maul within reach, though she knew it would be little use against anything truly dangerous. The cellar air rose cold and mineral, smelling of stone, damp earth, and roots. No rot. No animal musk. No sudden movement. 7 granite steps led down, each worn slightly in the middle. Maya swept them before placing her weight. The walls below were fieldstone, fitted without vanity, mortar pale in the joints where moisture had not darkened it. The cellar was larger than she expected, 12 feet by 15. Its floor laid in irregular stone with a narrow drain channel cut toward the marsh side. The ceiling beams above were low enough that she had to bow her head. She carried a candle and the stronger lantern mister. Bellamy had allowed her to borrow after she promised not to descend alone at night. Light spread over crocks, empty shelves, a broken barrel hoop, 2 glass demijohns, and a row of clay tiles stacked against the east wall. Nothing glittered. Nothing waited in theatrical arrangement. The cellar had the plain look of a place that had held potatoes, dye materials, root tonics, storm lanterns, and perhaps secrets too ordinary to announce themselves. At the center of the floor lay a single-dressed granite slab. It did not match the irregular stones around it. It was rectangular, smooth at the edges, and set with deliberate care. In its upper face someone had carved a craft mark, the same indigo stem inside a circle, shallow but unmistakable. The groove held dust. The slab had no ring, no visible hinge, no pry mark. It was either a marker, a cover, or a warning. Perhaps all 3. Maya knelt beside it and brushed the carved lines with her fingertips. Then she stood. Not everything has to be opened when first found. Ruth's letter had taught her that inheritance could include restraint. The slab remained where it was, calm under the lantern light, and Maya did not lift it. She inspected the shelves instead. On one, she found an intact stoneware jug stoppered with wax, but the contents had dried to black residue and she left it sealed. On another, a tin funnel, 2 broken clothespins, a bundle of stakes, and a ledger too mildewed to open safely. She wrapped the ledger in cloth and carried it upstairs later to dry slowly between boards weighted at the corners. The discovery came as she was leaving. On the stairs going up, her left foot brushed something that did not belong to the granite. A faint scrape. She lowered the lantern and saw that beneath the 3rd step, wedged in the shadow where the riser met the wall, was a small oak box. It had been pushed far enough back that dust and spider silk had hidden it from casual view. The lid was swollen but not sealed. She worked it free with both hands. The box was no longer than her forearm. Its hinges had gone green at the screws. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of blue cotton, lay a brass key and a tintype photograph. The key was modest but finely made, its shaft darkened, its bit cut in an uncommon pattern. The bow had been shaped not as a plain circle, but as an indigo stem branching inside a loop. She turned it in the lantern light, watching brightness move along the worn edges. A key belongs to a question even before a lock appears. The photograph was thin, dark, and cool. A young woman stood in front of the cottage in summer light, one hand resting on the rim of the cypress vat, the other holding a wooden shuttle against her skirt. Her dress was plain. Her hair was pinned back. Her expression was solemn because old cameras required stillness, but the face beneath that solemnity made Maya sit down on the cellar step. The cheekbones, the shape of the mouth, the steady, guarded eyes. Not identical. No face travels unchanged through a century. But there was enough resemblance to feel less like likeness than echo. The young woman looked as if she had been standing there all along, waiting for glass, chemistry, and time to darken around her. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, Adeline's granddaughter Naomi Rivers, daughter of Josiah, age 25, summer of 1903. Maya read the line once. Then again. The letter had named Naomi as Ruth's mother, born near the Penn School Road after emancipation. Here she stood young, not a name in ink only, but a person with one hand on the vat and a tool in the other, the shed behind her not ruined, not condemned, not yet forgotten. Maya carried the photograph and key upstairs. She set the tin type on the table beside Ruth's letter and placed the brass key on the mantel, where the marble, metal case, blue-threaded stones, and repaired candle saucer had begun to make a narrow geography of the kept. She did not yet know what the key opened. That seemed proper. By March, the snow retreated into ditches and shaded roots, then vanished without farewell. The creek beyond the marsh road grew loud with snowmelt and rain, carrying brown water beneath the rusted culvert and out toward the tidal channels. Walnut catkins appeared like green tassels, soft and improbable after so many bare weeks. The live oaks darkened. Marsh grass took on a dull gold at first, then began showing green near the roots. Birds grew less private. The chickadee returned often to the branch by the front window, joined by wrens, sparrows, and once a cardinal so red against the gray morning that Maya stopped with a brush in her hand and watched until it flew. Inside, the shed had crossed some invisible line. It was not finished. The vat still slept. The sign still needed careful paint. The exterior boards wanted scraping, oiling, fastening. The workroom shelves needed repair. The cellar slab held its question. But the place could hold a fire, resist rain, open and close its windows, keep a floor beneath a body, and receive mourning without shame. That was enough for one season. People began to leave things with more openness. Doris sent a folded index card and asked, "Through Reverend Boyd, how many words would fit on the cafe corkboard?" Caleb brought 2 straight cedar poles for a future drying rack. Mr. Bellamy found a used thermometer at an estate sale and sold it for less than he had paid, though he wrote the full amount on the account and then crossed out half with no explanation. Amos Crittenden came once to sit on the step in afternoon sun, examine the roofline from below, and said only, "Held." Maya had thought spring would mean beginning the craft. The letter waited. The seed tin waited. The vat waited most of all, round and dark, with the cypress stave still holding the stain of work done before her birth. Some mornings she stood beside it with one hand on the rim and imagined warm water, leaf, lye, molasses, cotton, air. Her body remembered Aunt Thea's shed. Her mind recited Ruth's temperatures. Her hands wanted to test what had been saved. But wanting is not readiness. She decided not to wake the vat that spring. The decision came not from fear, though fear was present, but from accuracy. The seeds were too rare for haste. The vat needed inspection by someone who understood cypress vessels. She needed clean cotton samples, proper pH strips, a reliable thermometer, washing soda, lime, bran, molasses, buckets that had never held paint, and time enough to fail without ruining what could not be replaced. She would order materials with 1 coin from the cash, one only, and write the purchase down. She would practice first on small samples, with purchased indigo paste, not the saved seed line. She would learn the discipline around the thing before touching the inheritance itself. So March became practice without awakening. She scoured thrifted cotton in the saucepan in a larger pot borrowed from Doris. She learned how long it took water to steam on her hearth and how quickly it cooled in the workroom. She tested knots for hanging skeins. She repaired the drying rack with Caleb's cedar poles. She copied Ruth's instructions onto a board and hung it near the vat, not as decoration, but as a working notice. She wrote failures in the same hand as successes, because the letter had required that too. April brought warmer rain. The marsh changed voices. Fuller now, insects tuning themselves at evening. The walnut tree opened its leaves one folded green hand at a time. The horseshoe in the bark disappeared partly behind new growth, as if the tree had accepted another year of keeping. Maya painted the sign only after the pollen washed from the air. She did not make it bright. She mixed a dark blue from store pigment and oil, matched as closely as she could to the deepest cloth sample in the cedar box, and filled the surviving letters first. Rivers, Indigo, and Cotton. Then, below them in smaller hand, she added a line not from pride, but from record. Hand-dyed cloth, repair, and lessons by appointment. The words looked too new at first. Weather would help. She stood back in the evening and let the sign become part of the wall. No one applauded. No car stopped. No relative arrived to claim what had been remade. The marsh moved behind her with its same slow breath. The front room smelled of lime wash, oil, ashes, and spring water. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Maya completed the first cloth she was willing to call finished. Not the first she had dyed. That had come much earlier, and it had been uneven in ways that would have made Aunt Thea lift one eyebrow and say nothing for a long time. There had been pale streaks from hurried scouring, a gray cast from a tired vat, and one batch of cotton so badly rinsed that it dried with a stiff hand and smelled faintly of lye. Maya kept every failure in a drawer with labels. She did not throw them away. They had paid tuition in a school where no teacher excused carelessness. The first finished cloth was a narrow table runner woven from cotton she had ordered unbleached, scoured twice. Mordant it according to notes she had tested across months, and dipped 7 times in a vat she had fed for nearly a year before trusting it with anything larger than a sample square. The blue did not shout. It held. In morning light it leaned toward river. In evening it darkened toward storm. Along the edges, she had worked a plain hem by hand, each stitch small enough to disappear unless the cloth was turned toward a window. She laid it across the repaired front table on December 9th, when the air outside carried the first true bite of winter. The shed, which by then could fairly be called a cottage without lying, held the cloth in a circle of hearth light. The table no longer sagged. Its split top had been joined with butterfly keys Caleb carved from walnut. The floor had deepened under wear and oil, the honey of the pine turning richer where feet traveled daily between door, hearth, workroom, and sink. The plaster patches had taken lime wash until they belonged to the wall without pretending to be original. The windows opened and closed on their cotton cords, the old glass wavering winter branches into something almost remembered. The front room contained little. A table. 2 chairs, one from Doris and one repaired from the shed's own broken frame. Shelves with jars, cloth samples, account books, candles, and folded cotton. A narrow cot along the wall, made with quilts that had been given, traded, or mended. The hearth tools stood clean beside the firebox. Above them, the mantel held the marble, the metal case, the blue-threaded stones, the tin-type photograph, the brass key, and Ruth's letter in a cedar frame Caleb had made without asking. The workroom had changed more slowly and more deeply. The vat had been tightened by a cooper from Edisto, who came recommended by a county agricultural agent and spoke to Cypress as if it might answer. 2 smaller vats stood beside it now. One for practice, one for teaching. The drying rack had been rebuilt. The pulley turned after oil, patience, and replacement of 1 pin. Cotton skeins hung from pegs. A thermometer rested in a blue cup. A ledger lay open on the table, not for display, but because work was being recorded there. The cellar slab waited until the second winter because some questions need the house to trust the hand that asks. Maya did not decide alone. That was another thing she had learned. She asked Mr. Bellamy to stand by because he understood old buildings and would not hurry. She asked Reverend Boyd because the note from Ruth had placed Samuel beneath the walnut tree in a way that made any hidden thing feel partly ceremonial. Caleb came too. Older by then, taller, his shoulders beginning to settle into their own width. Doris sent coffee in a jar wrapped with 2 towels and said she did not descend into cellars for anybody living or dead. On December 16th, they opened the cellar door after breakfast. The day was dry, cold, and bright. Light from the lantern fell over the fieldstone floor and the single-dressed granite slab at its center. The craft mark had been cleaned but never altered. The indigo stem inside the circle looked both simple and older than its carving. The slab was heavier than any of them expected. Mr. Bellamy studied its edges, found 2 shallow notches hidden under dust at the narrow ends, and set iron hooks there. Caleb and Reverend Boyd lifted with him while Maya guided a cedar wedge beneath one side. The stone rose only an inch at first. Dust breathed from the seam. They rested, shifted, lifted again. At last the slab moved enough to slide onto 2 boards laid beside it. Beneath was not a deep vault, only a fitted cavity lined with brick, dry and narrow. Inside lay a folded cloth wrapped in oilskin and a small envelope sealed with wax gone nearly black. Maya opened the oilskin first. The flag inside was folded into a tight triangle, its cotton aged to ivory, its blue field dark but softened, its stars arranged in 6 rows of 8. A 48-star flag. Along the hoist edge, stitched in blue thread so small she nearly missed it, was a name. Elias J. Freeman. Reverend Boyd removed his hat. No one spoke for a while. The envelope held a note, shorter than Ruth's, written in a firmer, older hand. August 20, 1918. This flag is for Elias Freeman if he does not return, and for his house if he does. War has called men again, and we women are left to keep what men think they are leaving behind. If he comes home, let him decide where it rests. If he does not, do not place it in any office drawer. Keep it where work is done. Cloth should stay near hands. Adeline. There was no long explanation. No pleating, no ornament. Only those lines, exact as a seam. Mr. Bellamy leaned closer to the note but did not touch it. That would be Ruth's grandmother. Yes, Maya said. Reverend Boyd looked at the flag, then at the ceiling beams above them. Elias came home. Maya nodded. Ruth's letter had named him as husband, had spoken of boats and lungs in winter. The flag had been prepared for his absence, then hidden after his return, perhaps by his own wish, perhaps by Adeline's, perhaps because even survival can be too large to leave unfolded in ordinary rooms. The brass key found its lock 2 days later. It was Caleb who noticed the plate in the walnut tree, though Maya had passed it for years by then. Winter had stripped the leaves again, and he had come to mend a loose step before rain. While carrying lumber past the trunk, he stopped beneath the horseshoe and stared at a place just above it where bark had grown in an odd oval around something darker. "This tree has metal twice," he said. Maya brought a brush and worked away moss. Then dirt, then the loose edges of bark already dead. Beneath was a brass plate no larger than her palm, green with age, set flush into the trunk where the tree had grown around it but not swallowed its center. At the lower edge was a keyhole shaped for an uncommon bit. The brass key from the mantel slid in with reluctance, then turned. Inside the trunk, in a cavity lined with tin and somehow still dry, was a second folded paper and a narrow blue ribbon brittle with age. The paper bore no dramatic secret, only a list of names and dates written across decades, each in a different hand. Adeline kept seed.
Naomi kept vat.
Ruth kept cloth. Samuel kept tools. Elias kept flag. The one who opens keeps next. At the bottom, in Ruth's narrow writing, one more line had been added. Do not let the tree be cut while it lives. Maya returned the ribbon to the cavity, added a copy of the note from the cellar, then locked the plate again. The key went back to the mantel, but its question had changed. It no longer asked what it opened. It asked what must remain closed and living. The Purple Heart was honored the following summer, not in a public ceremony, not with cameras, not with flags enough to make meaning smaller by repetition. Maya carried it on July 27th, the anniversary of the Korean Armistice Agreement, to Beaufort National Cemetery, where rows of white stones stood beneath live oaks and the air moved softly through Spanish moss. Reverend Boyd came with her. Mrs. Baptiste came too, wearing a navy dress and low shoes polished to a clear shine. Mr. Bellamy drove because the day was too hot for long walking and because some debts are paid by going along. The cemetery office helped locate the memorial record. Samuel's remains had never been brought home, but his name had been entered among those remembered by family request in the county years before. Maya stood where she was directed, beneath heat that trembled above the grass, and opened the metal case. She said his name once. Private Samuel Rivers. The words did not rise high. They did not need to. A cicada called from somewhere in the trees. Mrs. Baptiste bowed her head. Reverend Boyd's hat rested against his chest. Mr. Bellamy, who had known war only through older men and returned silences, looked toward the line of stones and kept his jaw still. Afterward, Maya returned the medal to its case and brought it home. It belonged near the work. Ruth had said as much without saying it. The money remained almost entirely where it had been kept. That surprised people when they learned of it, though very few did. Maya did not tell the story broadly. A county agricultural agent knew enough about the seed project to help without asking numbers. Mr. Bellamy knew because he had seen the accounting. Mrs. Baptiste knew because deeds and taxes passed through certain hands. Doris knew because cafes know everything eventually and choose what not to repeat. Caleb knew some, not all, and never asked for the rest. In the first year, Maya spent 3 coins and 1 bill. The silver quarters for roof materials. 1 worn $5 note for emergency supplies. Later, 1 silver dollar to order pH strips, a proper thermometer, and sample cotton through a catalog Mr. Bellamy distrusted until the package arrived correctly. She recorded each use in Ruth's ledger and sealed the equivalent value back when the shop began earning. By the second winter, the cash was whole again except for the original coins she chose not to replace, because their spending had become part of the repair story. The rest stayed wrapped in oilcloth beneath the vat, with newer cedar shavings, fresh tobacco leaf, and an added page in Maya's hand. For the next one. She paid her store account from work, not from the hidden trunk, once work began to come. Mending first. A church sash whose seam had failed. 2 table runners hemmed for Doris's cousin. A set of cotton napkins dyed pale blue for a woman who wanted no synthetic color near her granddaughter's wedding table. Lessons came slower. People liked the idea of handwork until it required standing quietly for several hours and not rushing the vat. Maya did not soften the requirement. Doris placed the first index card on the cafe corkboard in May. Rivers, Indigo, and Cotton. Repair, small dye work, hand lessons. Asked Doris for card. The card was plain white, written in Doris's block letters because Maya's own hand looked too careful, and the cafe owner said careful writing made some people afraid of prices. At first, 3 names came, then 7. By autumn, the mailing list had 43 people, each written in a ledger by hand, with notes about what they had asked for and whether they understood that weather could delay blue. There was no grand reopening, no ribbon, no reporter. The first Saturday lesson began with 4 women, 1 retired teacher, 1 nurse, 1 young mother with quiet eyes, and Mrs. Baptiste, who claimed she was there only to make sure county property was being treated responsibly. They stood around the smaller practice vat while Maya explained scouring, temperature, oxygen, and waiting. When the first cloth emerged green and turned blue in the air, no one spoke for several seconds. That silence was the correct price of admission. Caleb returned with the sign in late October, carrying it beneath one arm and pretending the weight did not matter. By then he had finished school and was working part-time for a carpenter near Burton, learning to cut stair stringers, hang doors, and sharpen plain irons without burning the edge. He still came by when storms left limbs down or when a task needed 2 hands and he somehow heard of it before being asked. His red Schwinn had been replaced by an old pickup whose passenger door opened only from inside. The splitting maul still rode in back. The sign was carved from walnut, not too polished, the letters cut deep enough for shadow to live inside them. He had used the tracing he made before weather could steal the last of the original paint. The top line read as it always had. Rivers, Indigo, and Cotton. Below it, in smaller letters, he had carved what the old sign had never said and yet had perhaps always meant. And daughters, plural. Maya stood with it in her hands for a long time. The word did not claim children she did not have, nor a future she could command. It opened a door wider than blood. Daughters of women who taught. Daughters of women who worked without record. Daughters who arrived by hunger, accident, grief, or curiosity. Daughters who might not know yet what they had inherited because nobody had told them they were allowed to keep anything. Caleb watched her from beside the truck, one hand on the open tailgate. "I can change it," he said. "No. It might be too much." "No." He nodded, relieved and embarrassed. They hung it together beneath the older painted board, not covering the past, not replacing it. The new sign did not try to look antique. It was clean, young, and serious. Rain and sun would age it. Hands would darken its lower edge. Time could do its work if the living did theirs. That night, after Caleb had gone and the road had settled into quiet, Maya lit the remaining half of Ruth's old candle for the last time. The flame was small now, the wax low in its saucer, but it still carried that faint honeyed scent when warmed. Maya placed fresh paper on the table. Took the fountain pen, Mrs. Baptiste had given her after finding 3 old ones in a courthouse drawer, and opened Ruth's letter beside the blank page. She did not copy the letter. That would have been easier and less true. She sat until the first sentence came as an inheritance and a responsibility both. My dear one, whoever you are. She wrote the words slowly. Then she stopped, listening to the workroom beyond the open door. The vat rested in the dark. Cotton dried on the rack. The ledger lay closed with the day's notes inside, outside temperature. Vat temperature. pH. Dip times. Weather. Result. On the mantel, the brass key caught a small point of candlelight. The tintype photograph of Naomi watched from its cedar frame. The purple heart rested in its case, neither hidden nor displayed for strangers. The marble sat where it had sat since being found beneath the floor. A child's lost moon kept it last in plain sight. Maya began again. She wrote about arriving with nothing that could be counted safely except coins. She wrote about the roof, the chimney, the floor, the windows, the plaster. She wrote the names of those who had helped, including those whose full names she never learned. She wrote that money must move slowly, that seeds must not be flattered into waste, that a craft is not preserved by admiring it from across the room. She wrote that no person should be made to prove belonging to those who only know how to take inventory after the work is done. The candle burned lower. Outside, December pressed cold against the windows and found no easy entrance. The walnut tree stood beyond the glass, bare and dark, holding its horseshoe, its brass plate, its living ring around metal and memory. The marsh moved under night, covering and uncovering what had always been there. Maya did not finish the letter that evening. It would take months, perhaps years. Some instructions could not be written until she had failed enough to earn them. Some kindnesses had not yet arrived. Some debts had not yet shown their proper form. She folded the unfinished pages into a cloth cover and placed them in the cedar box beside Ruth's letter. Not beneath it, not above it, but with it. Near midnight, she stepped outside. The air smelled of cold mud, chimney smoke, dormant grass, and the faint mineral trace of the vat that lived now behind repaired walls. The sign moved slightly in the wind. Rivers, Indigo, and Cotton. And Daughters. From the road, no one would mistake the place for prosperous. It remained modest, hand-worn, and close to the marsh. A passerby might see only a restored shed, a thin line of light at one window, a walnut tree, a road without much traffic. That would be nearly correct. Nearly. Inside were seats saved across fear. Money kept from haste. A flag folded for a man who returned. A medal for one who did not. Cloth that took color slowly. A letter begun for hands not yet born or not yet found. A table where strangers could learn to wait for blue. A floor that no longer hid its strength. The indigo dyer's shed waits. It has always waited. Back at the courthouse, in Mrs. Baptiste's lower desk drawer, There remained a dollar bill with a torn corner. She had not deposited it with the other fees. She had tried once, early on, and then set it aside for reasons she did not explain even to herself. It lay beneath a rubber band, an obsolete road map, and the receipt stub from the day a rootless girl bought a condemned place no one else wanted. Sometimes, when the office grew loud with forms, arguments, and the tired machinery of public business, Mrs. Baptiste opened the drawer to find a paper clip or a stamp pad and saw the bill there. She never touched it unless she had to move it. The missing corner made it easy to know. Some payments are not spent. They are kept.